Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we're sinking into the straw mattresses and woolen dreams of medieval sleepers. Those who rested beneath thatched roofs while stars wheeled overhead and church bells marked the hours of darkness. There's something deeply ironic about using stories of medieval sleep to help you find your own slumber tonight. Those ancient sleepers would find our modern beds impossibly soft, our darkened rooms impossibly quiet without the sounds of animals and family members breathing nearby. As you dim your lights and settle into your pillow's embrace, I invite you to journey with me to a time when sleep wasn't a luxury, but a necessity dictated by the sun's descent and the moon's gentle oversight. When darkness wasn't something to be conquered with artificial light, but an inevitable companion, to be respected, even feared. When dreams weren't just the mind's wanderings, but messages from beyond, divine whispers or demonic temptations that carried profound meaning for those who experienced them. Medieval people slept differently than we do. They entered darkness with rituals of protection, prayers whispered against the shadows. They slept in stages we've largely forgotten, waking in the midnight hours to tend fires, visit neighbors, make love, or simply sit in contemplative silence, before returning to their second sleep. Their relationship with night was intimate, immediate, unavoidable. Let me know in the comments what country and city you're watching from, and what time it is right now. I wonder how many of you are watching as midnight bells would have once called medieval villagers to their beds, or during that quiet middle watch when monks rose for prayers while others turned in their half-sleep, adjusting straw beneath tired bodies. Tonight, we'll explore how our ancestors slept through winter's long darkness and summer's brief respite. We'll discover the stories they told to ward off night terrors, the herbs they placed beneath pillows for peaceful dreams, the communal warmth of bodies sharing not just beds, but the vulnerable state of slumber itself. Sleep was once a different country with its own customs and expectations. Its borders were marked by ritual, the banking of coals in the hearth, the drawing of bed curtains, the murmured prayers against nocturnal dangers. Its terrain was uneven, interrupted by necessary wakings to feed infants, check livestock, or simply stare into the embers and ponder mortality in darkness that was never truly complete. As your own eyes grow heavy, perhaps you'll find comfort knowing that countless generations before you have surrendered to the same mysterious state, drifting into unconsciousness beneath the same stars, even if the beds were harder and the nights more crowded than our own. Only, if this calms you, if these whispers from history's slumber help ease your modern mind toward rest, consider subscribing as we journey through history's quietest moments together. For now, let your breathing slow as we step back in time, to when sleep was both more precarious and more natural than our own carefully controlled descent into dreams. You wake in darkness so complete, it feels like a physical presence against your skin. For a disorienting moment, you forget where and when you are. The heaviness of woolen blankets presses down, different from your light modern comforter. There's a scratching sensation beneath you, the straw mattress shifting as you turn, hundreds of dried stems compressed by your weight, rustling with every small movement like whispered conversations. The air smells different here. Smoke from the banked hearth fire lingers, mixed with the earthen scent of the packed dirt floor in poorer homes, or the polish of wooden planks in wealthier ones. Perhaps there's the faint animal musk from the livestock kept on the lower level of the house, their body heat rising through the floorboards to provide additional warmth on this cold night. Human scents too, the people sleeping nearby, their breath forming small clouds in the winter air. You've awakened during what medieval people would call the first sleep. You went to bed with the sun set, or shortly after, when darkness made most work impossible, and precious candles or rushlights too expensive to burn without purpose. Now, you've naturally stirred some time after midnight, during the watch that monks rise to sing their night offices. This waking is not insomnia as we understand it today. It's the normal pattern, the way humans slept for millennia before electricity extended day into night. Your eyes adjust gradually. Moonlight filters weakly through the shuttered window, glass being a luxury few can afford. The shutters have small holes drilled into them, not just for the practical purpose of allowing a hint of light, but because completely sealing oneself in darkness was considered unnatural, even dangerous. Evil spirits might become trapped inside, with you. You're not alone in this room. The rhythmic breathing of family members surrounds you. Children nestled at the foot of the bed, or in trundle beds nearby, perhaps grandparents sharing your sleeping space, or servants in a larger household. Privacy is a concept that would seem strange to medieval sleepers. Bodies share warmth by necessity and custom. The bed itself is a valued possession. The wooden frame, if you're fortunate enough to have one, represents significant expense. More likely, your mattress rests on a platform or directly on the floor. Beneath you is not the spring-supported softness of modern beds, but a canvas or linen sack, stuffed with straw, perhaps wool if you're wealthier, or even feathers if you're among the privileged few. Your pillow, if you have one, is similarly filled. Some rest their heads on wooden blocks shaped to cradle the neck. In this middle night waking, you might rise briefly. Your feet touch the cold floor, and you wrap yourself in an extra layer, not pajamas as we know them, but perhaps a night shift, or simply the day clothes you loosened but didn't fully remove. Complete nudity during sleep would be rare, considered vulnerable both practically and spiritually. What do you do in this midnight hour? Perhaps you stir the fire, adding a carefully saved piece of wood to coax the embers back to warming flames. You might check on the children, adjusting their covers against the drafts that seep through wattle and daub walls. You could take this time for prayer. Many medieval people considered the night watches ideal for contemplation, the soul closer to God in these hushed hours. Some use this waking time for visiting neighbors. A quiet knock on the door isn't an emergency, but a social call. Others write by the dim light of a single candle, recording dreams or thoughts in precious vellum journals if they're among the literate few. Couples often use this time for intimacy, the middle night hours considered ideal for conception in many medieval medical texts. You can hear sounds outside, the call of the night watchman marking the hour, perhaps the distant howl of a wolf at the forest's edge, or the hooting of an owl that medieval folklore associates with imminent death. Inside, the house itself speaks a language of gentle creaks and settling timbers. The darkness feels alive with presence, both physical and otherworldly. Eventually, you'll return to bed for what medieval people called the second sleep, lasting until dawn breaks and roosters announce the new day. This segmented pattern meant medieval sleepers rarely experienced what we call insomnia. Wakeful periods were expected, embraced as natural parts of the night's rhythm. But to understand how you came to rest your head beneath these ancient beams, we must first understand how sleep itself was understood by those who came before us. Sleep wasn't merely a biological necessity to medieval minds. It was a state, fraught with spiritual significance, a small rehearsal for death, a vulnerable period when the soul might wander while the body lay defenseless. The medieval person approaches sleep with a complex mixture of necessity and trepidation. The body craves rest after long hours of physical labor. The mind seeks respite from the constant demands of survival. Yet sleep represents danger too. a surrender of consciousness in a world where threats lurk in both physical and spiritual realms. Before lying down, you would have performed small rituals of protection, a prayer to your patron saint. Perhaps the tracing of a cross over the bed or on your forehead. Some place protective herbs under pillows, lavender for peaceful dreams, rosemary to ward off evil influences, hops to ensure sound slumber. Others hang iron implements nearby, the metal believed to repel supernatural visitors. For the wealthy, bed curtains provide both practical warmth and symbolic enclosure, creating a sanctuary within the already enclosed space of the bedchamber. The canopy overhead isn't merely decorative. It prevents dust, insects and rodents from falling onto sleepers from the rafters above. The curtains drawn around the bed keep drafts at bay, but also create a liminal space, a threshold between waking and sleeping worlds. Your bed might be positioned carefully according to folk beliefs, the head pointing east toward Jerusalem, or, in some regions, north-south to align with the Earth's natural energies. Never west, the direction of death and sunset. These orientations aren't merely superstition, but reflect a worldview where every action carries symbolic weight, where physical positioning might influence the soul's journey during dreams. As you settle again into the straw mattress, pulling rough woolen blankets to your chin, you notice how different this feels from modern sleep environments. There is no attempt to create perfect silence. The natural sounds of others breathing, of animals below, of wind through thatch are accepted, companions to slumber. There is no expectation of complete darkness. The dull glow of banked coals provides both practical reassurance and symbolic continuation of life through the vulnerable night hours. Your body knows this rhythm, even if your modern mind has forgotten. Humans slept this way for thousands of years, with the darkness, in stages, surrounded by others, alert to the world's nocturnal language. As you drift back toward the second sleep, your breathing synchronizes with those around you, creating a communal respiration that would be familiar to generations of sleepers before electricity fractured our relationship with night. But to understand how sleep was truly experienced in medieval times, we must look beyond the physical arrangements to the cultural understandings that gave meaning to these hours of vulnerability and dreams. In a world without electric light, darkness was not merely the absence of day, but a presence with its own rules and rhythms. Medieval people didn't resist this darkness. They surrendered to its inevitable arrival, adapted to its demands, and created patterns of rest that flowed with nature's tide rather than against it. Their sleep wasn't compressed into our modern expectation of a single uninterrupted block, but unfolded in stages marked by church bells, cock crows, and the positions of stars wheeling overhead. You sleep differently in this medieval world. Your body knows when to surrender to the first waves of slumber, usually shortly after sunset when productive work becomes impossible without expensive illumination. This first sleep, what medieval people called prima somnus, descends heavily after days filled with physical labor. Bodies accustomed to tilling fields, hauling water, kneading bread, or working metal sink gratefully into this initial rest. The darkness outside is profound. No streetlights cast orange glows through windows. No passing headlights momentarily illuminate walls. On moonless nights, the darkness has weight and texture, an almost tangible presence pressing against shuttered windows. On nights when the moon rides high, its silver light creates a different world of shadows and half-seen forms that medieval folklore populates with spirits, wanderers, and watchful saints. After 4 or 5 hours of this first sleep, your body naturally rises to consciousness, not fully awake as in our modern understanding of insomnia, but in a state medieval doctors called dorveil, a watch sleep where the mind floats in peaceful contemplation. This midnight waking wasn't considered a disorder, but the natural order documented in medical texts, literary works, and household accounts throughout the medieval period. Monasteries structured their entire routines around this biphasic sleep pattern. Monks rose for matins and lauds during this midnight waking, their prayers filling the darkest hours when they believed the boundary between earthly and divine realms grew thinner. Their rhythms, formalized in bells that rang across towns and countryside, became the pulse that regulated secular sleep as well. This middle night waking serves practical purposes beyond spiritual devotion. It's when you check your home's hearthfire, ensuring sufficient coals remain banked to rekindle morning flames without the difficult and precious task of striking new fire. Parents use this time to suckle infants, changing swaddling cloths, and offering comfort in the night watches. Some rise to check on livestock, particularly during birthing seasons, when animals might need assistance under cover of darkness. But this waking serves deeper psychological purposes as well. Medieval medical theory, building on ancient Greek physicians like Galen, suggests this midnight contemplation allows humours to settle and rebalance. Dreams from the first sleep can be remembered, interpreted, and even directed toward more auspicious visions for the second sleep. The quiet darkness becomes a canvas for reflection impossible in daylight's demands. After an hour or two of this peaceful wakefulness, the second sleep begins, concubia nocte, or dead of night sleep. Often deeper than the first, this sleep carries you toward dawn. The body temperature drops further. The mind descends into different dream states. This second sleep was considered especially restorative, when the body performed its deepest healing work in medieval understanding. The length of these sleep cycles shifted with the seasons, another respect in which medieval sleep differed from our artificially consistent modern patterns. Winter brought darkness stretching 16 or 17 hours in northern Europe. Summer might reduce night to a brief interlude of 7 or 8 hours. Medieval people didn't fight these seasonal variations, but adapted their sleep accordingly. Winter, sleep expanded to fill available darkness. You might retire as early as 6 in the evening during December's long nights, rising briefly around midnight, then returning to sleep until dawn's late arrival around 8. This extended rest period helped conserve precious calories when food grew scarce in winter months. Bodies slowed, metabolism reduced, human rhythms synchronizing with the dormancy visible in the natural world. Summer brought the opposite adaptation. Sleep contracted to fit shorter nights, with correspondingly expanded daytime activities. You might continue working fields or crafts until true darkness around 9 or 10, sleep until a brief midnight waking, then return to slumber until dawn broke around 4 or 5. Some medieval accounts suggest people compensated with afternoon rest periods during summer heat. Not our modern conceptualization of napping, but a practical adaptation to extended daylight. Your sleep in this medieval world responds to lunar cycles as well as seasonal ones. Full moon nights bring both practical benefits and spiritual concerns. The increased light makes midnight activities easier, traveling between villages, tending to outdoor tasks during the night watch. Yet folklore associates full moons with increased supernatural activity, with transformations and visitations requiring additional protective measures before sleep. The new moon brings deeper darkness and its own adjustments. Activities during the midnight waking become more interior, more contemplative, limited by profound blackness outside. Medieval sleep wisdom suggests different herbs for new moon nights, valerian and chamomile to deepen the second sleep, when external darkness is most complete. Church feasts and holy days create another rhythm superimposed upon these natural cycles. Certain saints' vigils require modified sleep, with extended waking periods for prayer. Christmas season, the 12 days stretching from Nativity to Epiphany, develops its own nocturnal customs, with specialty foods consumed during the midnight, waking, particular stories told before returning to the second sleep. For monastic communities, the sleep pattern becomes even more segmented. Beyond the midnight rising for matins and lauds, many religious orders include additional night offices, nocturnes, that divide darkness into watches of prayer and contemplation. A monk's sleep might break 3 or 4 times between compline, evening prayers before rest, and prime, dawn prayers beginning the new day. These rhythms shape not just physical rest, but medieval consciousness itself. The acceptance of darkness, the expectation of waking, the communal experience of night's watches, all create a relationship with sleep utterly foreign to our modern expectation of unconsciousness as an unbroken state to be achieved and maintained. You learn the language of medieval night, its sounds, its silences, its subtle gradations of darkness. The deep hush just after sunset differs from the expectant stillness before dawn. The quality of darkness varies through the watches. Velvet black in early evening, thinning to grey as morning approaches. Your body knows these distinctions even when your eyes cannot see. As the church bells marked the hours, they didn't just measure time. They measured the very boundaries between wakefulness and dreams, between the profane day and the sacred night. The bells become both practical timekeeper and spiritual reminder, each toll carrying across sleeping villages to mark humanity's place in both earthly and divine orders. And through these complex rhythms, seasonal, lunar, liturgical, medieval, people found a relationship with sleep that was paradoxically more natural and more infused with meaning than our own. Their surrender to darkness wasn't defeat, but acknowledgement of cosmic patterns larger than human control. Their segmented rest wasn't the broken sleep we might diagnose today, but a different way of being, aligned with bodies that hadn't yet been trained to expect 8 uninterrupted hours of unconsciousness. Sleep was both a small death and a divine rejuvenation. Each night as medieval eyes closed, souls prepared for a journey through darkness that mirrored the soul's ultimate passage. Each morning as consciousness returned, bodies experienced a small resurrection, a daily rhythm echoing Christianity's central promise of death conquered, of dawn following the darkest night. This spiritual understanding transformed sleep from mere biological necessity into sacred practice. Your sleep in this medieval world carries theological weight. The vulnerability of unconsciousness becomes an act of faith, a surrender to forces beyond your control, an acknowledgement of human frailty in a divine cosmos. The medieval sleeper doesn't simply rest, but participates in a spiritual exercise repeated throughout life as preparation for the soul's final journey. Before you surrender to sleep in a medieval bed, prayers form an essential ritual barrier between waking and sleeping worlds. You might recite the Pater Noster and Ave Maria, basic prayers known even to the illiterate. Wealthier or more educated sleepers might add more complex devotions, psalms selected for their protective qualities, invocations to guardian angels who watch during vulnerable hours of unconsciousness. These prayers serve practical psychological purposes, quieting the mind, establishing routine, creating the conditions for surrender to sleep. But medieval people understand them primarily as spiritual armor, as protective formulas that create sacred space around the vulnerable sleeping body. The spoken words hang in darkened rooms like invisible curtains, keeping malevolent influences at bay while the soul travels through dreams. Sleep and death entwine in medieval consciousness. Beds and graves share vocabulary in many European languages of the period. The horizontal body, eyes closed, breathing slowed. The parallels are impossible to ignore in a culture intimately familiar with death's physical manifestations. 2. Sleep and to die become linguistic cousins, metaphorically linked in prayer books, sermons, and common speech. Yet this association doesn't necessarily fill the medieval sleeper with dread. Instead, it transforms nightly rest into a rehearsal, a practice for the soul's ultimate passage. Each successful journey through darkness to morning light reinforces faith in the greater resurrection. Each dream journey prepares the soul for its eventual flight from the body. Sleep becomes not just rest, but spiritual training. Medieval religious authorities debate the spiritual status of dreams extensively. Are they divine messages, demonic temptations, or merely physical manifestations of bodily humors? The consensus that emerges places dreams in an ambiguous middle ground, potentially meaningful, but requiring careful interpretation through moral and theological lenses. Monastic communities develop elaborate protocols around sleep, understanding it as a necessary concession to bodily weakness, but also an opportunity for spiritual discipline. The rule of St. Benedict carefully prescribes sleep schedules, sleeping arrangements, even proper posture and attire for monks at rest. These rules serve both practical community needs and spiritual goals: the mortification of desires for comfort, the maintenance of modest behavior even in unconsciousness. Monks sleep in dormitories rather than private cells in many orders, their bodies arranged with precision, fully clothed, hands outside blankets, positioned to rise quickly for night offices. Some traditions require monks to sleep in cruciform position, arms extended in unconscious prayer. The dormitory becomes another devotional space, where even breathing carries spiritual significance. The monastic hours, divisions of day and night marked by bells and prayers, eventually extend their influence far beyond monastery walls, structuring sleep for secular communities as well. Town bells ring to mark Compline, the final evening prayer, signaling appropriate time for sleep. They ring again for matins in deepest night, and finally for lauds as morning approaches. Even those who don't rise to pray know their place in this sacred chronology, their sleep nested within divine time. Dreams occupy an especially complex position in medieval spiritual understanding. Biblical precedent establishes dreams as potential vehicles for divine communication. Joseph's prophetic dreams, Jacob's ladder to heaven, the warnings received by the Magi. Yet Christian theology also warns of false visions sent by demonic forces to confuse or tempt the vulnerable sleeper. This ambiguity creates an entire practice of dream discernment. You learn to evaluate your dreams through moral and theological frameworks. Dreams that inspire virtue, devotion, or charitable actions might be divine in origin. Those provoking lust, greed, or despair require spiritual countermeasures upon waking, special prayers, confessions, or small acts of penance to neutralize their influence. Certain saints develop special associations with sleep and dreams. Saint Michael is invoked for protection against nocturnal demons. Saint Christopher, already a guardian of travelers, extends his protection to the sleeping soul's dream journeys. Most powerfully, the Virgin Mary becomes the guardian of vulnerable sleepers, her maternal protection extending through the dangerous night hours. Prayer books include specialized devotions for different sleep-related concerns, prayers against nightmares, invocations for prophetic dreams, rituals to ensure the soul's safe return to the body by morning. These spiritual technologies reflect the medieval understanding of sleep as a liminal state, where regular boundaries between physical and spiritual realms grow permeable. Houses of women, both formal convents and informal communities, develop their own sacred sleep practices. Female visionary experiences often occur during sleep states or in the liminal spaces between waking and sleeping. Mystics like Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, and Bridget of Sweden receive their most profound visions during what modern sleep science might call hypnagogic or hypnopompic states, the transitions between consciousness and unconsciousness. The physical architecture of sleep reflects these spiritual understandings. Bed curtains in wealthy households aren't merely practical barriers against drafts, but symbolic enclosures creating sacred space, miniature sanctuaries for the vulnerable sleeper. Bedposts carved with protective saints, headboards incorporating subtle crosses or chi-rho symbols, pillows embroidered with brief prayers, design elements that serve spiritual function during unconscious hours. Even the orientation of the bed carries religious significance. Medieval sleeping chambers often position beds on an east-west axis, allowing sleepers to face Jerusalem even in repose. This alignment connects the small dramas of nightly sleep and waking with the greater Christian narrative of death and resurrection, the body in proper position for both personal dawn and ultimate judgment day. The communal nature of medieval sleep, multiple people sharing beds and chambers, finds theological justification as well as practical necessity. The vulnerable individual sleeper gains spiritual protection through proximity to others. Children sleep near parents not just for warmth and comfort, but because adult souls might shield younger ones from spiritual predation during unconscious hours. This sacred understanding of sleep extends to the rhythm of the liturgical year. Different seasons bring different sleep customs, prayers, and protective measures. Advent and Lent might see increased night vigils, voluntary reductions in sleep comfort as forms of penance. Christmas and Easter develop specialized blessings for sleeping areas, reinforcing the connection between divine and human cycles of darkness and rebirth. While monks rose for midnight prayers, ordinary people nested together in arrangements that would seem strange to our modern sensibilities of privacy and space. Yet these communal sleeping practices weren't merely economic necessity, but embodied theological values of community, mutual protection, and shared vulnerability before God. The medieval sleeper was never truly alone, physically or spiritually, in tea. The journey through night's darkness, the softness we take for granted, was once the greatest luxury imaginable. Your body in this medieval night rests on surfaces that reflect both practical necessity and social station. From the simplest straw-stuffed sacks laid directly on earthen floors to elaborate feather beds raised on carved wooden frames, there, curtains embroidered with family crests or protective saints. The medieval bed evolves through centuries of practical innovation and social differentiation. The earliest forms are hardly beds at all by modern standards, pallets of straw covered with rough woolen blankets, easily rolled and stored during daylight hours, when living spaces served multiple functions. These simple beds leave few archaeological traces, but appear in manuscript illustrations, humble rectangles at the margins of domestic scenes. For most medieval sleepers, the mattress consists of a coarse linen or hemp sack stuffed with whatever materials the local environment provides in abundance. Straw forms the most common filling, readily available after harvest, replaced seasonally when it compresses and fragments. The whispered rustling of these straw mattresses becomes the soundtrack of medieval sleep, bodies turning in darkness to redistribute compressed stalks, seeking momentary comfort before settling again. Wool provides a step up in comfort and status. Sheep-raising regions develop mattresses filled with raw wool, warmer than straw, less prone to compaction, but more expensive and attractive to moths and vermin. Coastal areas sometimes use dried seaweed or marsh grasses, their salt content providing some natural resistance to insects and mildew. Forest regions might stuff mattresses with dried moss or leaves, materials that modern sleepers would find unimaginably coarse, but which medieval bodies accept as normal. Feathers represent the pinnacle of sleeping luxury, expensive, difficult to collect in quantity, requiring specialized containment to prevent quills from poking through fabric. A feather bed marks its owner as wealthy, the softness of sleep becoming a tangible expression of social status. Account books from great medieval households record feather beds as significant investments, sometimes listed among items important enough to specify in wills and inheritance documents. The coverings that warm medieval sleepers tell similar stories of class and resource availability. Rough woolen blankets serve most bodies, their warmth practical, but their texture something modern skin would find intolerable. The wool retains natural lanolin, making blankets somewhat water-resistant, but also carrying the distinctive sheep scent that permeates sleeping areas. Wealthier households might own blankets woven from finer wool, fulled and finished to create softer surfaces, sometimes dyed with expensive colorants that rarely show in the darkness of the bedchamber, but signify status when aired during daylight. Linen sheets, when present at all, provide a barrier between rough mattress materials and human skin. These sheets aren't the crisp, white expanses of modern bedding, but coarser fabrics, often unbleached, surviving for years or decades with infrequent washing. The smell of these sheets would be immediately recognizable to the medieval nose, a combination of wood smoke, body oils, and the herbs sometimes strewn between layers for their pleasant scent or insect-repellent properties. For the wealthiest sleepers, silk sheets become the ultimate luxury, imported at extraordinary cost from distant lands, cool. In summer, surprisingly warm in winter, these smooth fabrics represent not just comfort, but global trade connections and the ability to command exotic goods. Yet even these elite sleepers would find their silk sheets coarser than modern fabrics. The handloom production creating textures that machine manufacturing has eliminated from our tactile vocabulary. Pillows follow similar hierarchies of material and meaning. The poorest sleepers use bundled clothing, perhaps a stuffed linen sack, or simply an extended arm beneath the head. Middle-class households might possess proper pillows filled with wool scraps or low-grade feathers. Elite pillows contain the finest down, soft enough to allow the head to sink, to cradle the face in unprecedented luxury. Some medieval medical authorities actually warn against pillows that are too soft, suggesting they allow unhealthy postures during sleep or encourage excessive comfort that weakens the constitution. The physical elevation of the bed above floor level marks another status division. Most medieval sleepers rest close to the earth, their pallets laid directly on packed dirt, stone, or wooden floors. This positioning places bodies in the coolest air layer of the home, a disadvantage in winter but welcome during summer heat. It also leaves sleepers vulnerable to pests, rodents, insects, and the smaller domestic animals that might share medieval living spaces. As you rise in social hierarchy, your bed rises physically from the floor. Simple wooden platforms elevate mattresses slightly, providing some protection from drafts and creatures. More elaborate bedsteads lift elite sleepers further from the floor's perils, their height requiring steps or stools for access. This elevation serves practical purposes, but also reflects the metaphorical raising of social status, the physical height of sleep position corresponding to hierarchical height in medieval society. The bed frame itself evolves into increasingly complex forms throughout the medieval period. Early versions consist of little more than wooden boards supported on trestles, temporary structures assembled for sleep and potentially dismantled during daylight. By the later Middle Ages, wealthy households invest in permanent bedsteads of increasing elaboration, carved posts, headboards decorated with family symbols or religious imagery, joined with sophisticated woodworking techniques that demonstrate both wealth and artisanal skill. Perhaps the most significant development in medieval bed architecture is the addition of curtains and canopies, transforming the simple sleeping platform into an enclosed chamber, a room within a room. These fabric walls serve multiple practical functions, retaining precious body heat in drafty chambers, providing visual privacy in rooms where multiple people sleep or pass through, and protecting sleepers from dust or debris falling from overhead rafters. But bed curtains acquire symbolic meanings beyond these practical benefits. The enclosed bed becomes a sacred space, a protective cocoon for the vulnerable sleeping body. Curtains sometimes bear embroidered prayers or protective symbols. The act of closing bed curtains takes on ritual significance, the physical barrier, reinforcing spiritual boundaries between waking and sleeping states. The great beds of noble houses become dynastic symbols, places of birth, conception, and death, rather than merely nightly rest. These massive structures remain stationary, while generations of family members pass through them, lending continuity to aristocratic lineages. A lord might sleep in the same bed where his grandfather died and his children were conceived. This continuity of furniture reflecting the desired continuity of bloodlines. Yet even these grand beds would strike modern sleepers as uncomfortable. The best medieval mattresses still contain lumps and irregularities unimaginable in our machine-manufactured bedding. The finest sheets would feel rough against modern skin accustomed to high thread counts and chemical softeners. The natural, filling materials gather moisture from sleeping bodies, requiring regular airing but infrequent washing. Concepts of hygiene being vastly different in the medieval world. Your medieval body adapts to these sleeping surfaces, developing calluses and adjustments modern bodies have lost. The softness we consider essential for rest would seem suspiciously excessive, perhaps dangerously indulgent to medieval sleepers. Their bodies know how to find comfort in firmer surfaces, how to arrange limbs to minimize pressure points, how to build nests within seemingly unyielding materials. The emotional significance of the bed transcends its physical composition. In a world where most possessions are utilitarian and minimal, the bed represents one of the household's most valuable assets. Family beds pass through generations, sometimes explicitly mentioned in wills alongside land and jewelry. The bed becomes repository of family history. Births, deaths, conceptions, illnesses, recoveries, all occurring within its wooden boundaries. As you lay upon your straw-filled mattress, you weren't alone, not just in the crowded sleeping chamber, but in the collective imagination that filled the darkness with meaning. The medieval bed was never merely furniture, but a threshold between states of consciousness, between social classes, between life and death itself. In its rough embrace, bodies found not just physical rest, but their proper place in both earthly and cosmic hierarchies. Privacy in sleep is a modern invention. Medieval slumber was a communal affair. Your body in this distant past never experiences the isolation of a private bedroom, never knows the silence of sleeping entirely alone. Instead, you breathe in rhythm with others, your unconscious form witnessed by family members, servants, apprentices, or fellow travelers. This shared vulnerability creates bonds modern sleepers rarely experience. The intimate knowledge of others' breathing patterns, sleep positions, unconscious murmurings. The medieval household arranges its sleeping members according to complex hierarchies that reflect broader social structures. The typical peasant home consists of a single room, or perhaps two, with every function of daily life: cooking, eating, working, socializing, and sleeping, occurring in shared space. As night falls, This multi-purpose room transforms. Tables fold away. Pallets emerge from storage. Bodies arrange themselves in familiar configurations, claiming their customary territories within the limited floor space. Parents and small children often share a single bed, the family bed serving as both practical heat conservation and protective enclosure for vulnerable young ones. Older children may sleep on trundle beds that slide beneath the main bed during daylight, pulled out at night to form a constellation of sleepers arranged by age and status. Adolescents might claim floor space near the hearth, while servants or apprentices sleep near doors or windows, less comfortable positions reflecting their lower household status. In wealthier households with multiple rooms, sleeping arrangements reflect more complex social stratifications. The master and mistress might occupy the only proper bedstead, while children, relatives, and upper servants arrange themselves in adjacent spaces. Lower servants sleep in kitchens, stables, or hallways, their bodies distributed throughout the house according to their function and rank. In the largest noble households, elaborate bedchambers create a performance of privacy for the highest-ranking family members, though even these elite sleepers rarely experience true solitude. The lord and lady might have attendants sleeping at the foot of their bed or on pallets within the bedchamber, servants whose bodies remain present even during the most intimate hours. These arrangements reflect not just practical considerations, but concepts of status. The ability to command others even during unconscious hours becomes a mark of power. The constant availability of serving bodies a visible demonstration of rank. Travelers experience different forms of communal sleep, often more promiscuous in their social mixing than would be acceptable in permanent households. Medieval inns rarely offer private rooms. Instead, travelers share common sleeping halls, bodies arranged on benches or floor pallets with minimal separation. A merchant might find himself sleeping alongside strangers of various social classes. Fellow merchants, pilgrims, laborers, perhaps even minor nobility traveling without full retinue. These communal sleeping arrangements at inns create their own protocols and vulnerabilities. Travelers sleep fully clothed, perhaps with valuables secured within their garments or used as pillows. They arrange themselves with feet toward the central fire, heads radiating outward like spokes. The subtle negotiations of space, who sleeps, where, how much distance between bodies, who claims spots near warmth or away from drafts, create momentary hierarchies among strangers who disband at dawn. Monastic dormitories represent the most formal version of communal sleep, their arrangements reflecting theological principles rather than family bonds. Monks or nuns sleep in rows of simple beds or pallets, each identical to emphasize the community's spiritual equality. Each religious sleeper occupies individual bedding, but remains visible to all others, privacy sacrificed as protection against both physical temptation and spiritual attack. The dormitory becomes another space of spiritual discipline, where even unconscious posture remains subject to community scrutiny. The practice of bed sharing extends throughout all levels of medieval society. Even among the wealthy who possess multiple beds, individual sleeping rarely occurs. Bodies share mattresses for warmth, security, and efficient use of limited heating resources. This proximity creates forms of intimacy largely forgotten in our era of private bedrooms and individual mattresses. You grow accustomed to the sounds and sensations of others while sleeping, the weight that slightly tilts the mattress when someone else turns, the varied breathing patterns that form nocturnal harmonies, the shared warmth that makes winter nights survivable. Modern sleepers might find this constant presence intrusive or disruptive, but medieval bodies adapt. often sleeping more soundly in the reassuring company of others than in isolation. Children never experience the modern concept of sleeping alone as a developmental milestone. Instead, they move through different shared sleeping arrangements as they age, from nestled between parents as infants, to clustered with siblings or cousins, to eventually sharing space with spouses and their own children. This continuous experience of communal sleep creates different psychological relationships to darkness and vulnerability than modern private sleeping engenders. The emotional dimensions of shared sleep extend beyond practical considerations. The medieval bed becomes a place of murmured confidences, exchanged in darkness when privacy proves otherwise impossible. Secrets passed between bedfellows beneath woolen covers, prayers and fears whispered into the darkness. These nighttime conversations create bonds between family members, between masters and apprentices, between fellow travelers. Intimate knowledge shared in vulnerable hours. Not all shared sleep is equal in its social implications. Who sleeps beside whom carries significant meaning. Sharing a bed could indicate deeply intimate friendship, blood, brothers or sworn companions whose bond extended into these vulnerable hours. Medieval literature contains numerous references to knights or nobles sharing beds as demonstrations of trust and loyalty, their physical proximity during vulnerable sleep hours symbolizing emotional and political alliances. For married couples, shared sleeping represents both practical necessity and symbolic union. The marriage bed itself carries legal significance. The consummation that occurs there seals matrimonial contracts, transforms legal status, and initiates the potential for legitimate heirs. Yet this most intimate space remains paradoxically public in many households, with children or servants sleeping nearby, household activities continuing around the curtained bed. Travel disrupts normal sleeping hierarchies, creating unusual proximity between bodies normally kept separate by social boundaries. Pilgrim hostels and monasteries offering hospitality create temporary communities of sleepers from diverse backgrounds. These institutions develop architectural and procedural solutions to maintain appropriate divisions, separate halls for men and women, divided sleeping platforms, carefully positioned attendants to monitor nocturnal propriety. The winter intensifies shared sleeping practices across all social classes. As temperatures drop, bodies cluster more densely for survival. Even households with multiple rooms might abandon separate sleeping spaces during the coldest months, the entire family gathering in a single chamber where a fire can be maintained. Animals sometimes join these winter sleeping arrangements in peasant households. Chickens roosting near the ceiling, dogs curled at feet, occasionally even larger livestock brought indoors, their body heat contributing to the collective warmth. Summer brings different configurations as heat rather than cold dictates comfort. Bodies spread farther apart, seeking coolness. Wealthier households might utilize different chambers for summer sleeping, upper rooms catching evening breezes, garden pavilions offering relief from heat retained in stone walls. The rhythm of shared sleep adapts to seasonal needs, the distance between bodies expanding and contracting with the annual temperature cycle. Within these shared sleeping spaces, subtle boundaries develop to create minimal privacy. Sleepers arrange themselves head to foot rather than aligned in the same direction. Bundled clothing serves as improvised barriers between bodies. Bed curtains in wealthier households create visual, if not auditory, separation. These small adaptations allow some preservation of individual dignity within fundamentally communal arrangements. The language of medieval sleep reflects this communal nature. To make the bed in medieval households meant not simply arranging linens, but organizing the shared sleeping arrangement, determining who sleeps where, in what order, under which coverings. The verb encompasses both physical preparation and social orchestration, acknowledging that bed-making requires negotiating human relationships as much as arranging material objects. Sleep becomes a shared journey rather than a private retreat. You enter darkness together with your bedfellows, potentially sharing dreams through midnight conversations when you wake in the night watches. You witness others' vulnerabilities, their snoring, sleep-talking, unconscious movements, creating a deep form of knowledge largely absent from modern relationships outside intimate partnerships. Medieval medical understanding reinforces these practices, suggesting that solitary sleep is potentially dangerous. Sleeping alone leaves the individual vulnerable to melancholy, to spiritual attack, to the unnatural accumulation of certain humors within the body. The presence of others creates balanced energy, protection against both physical and psychological dangers that might manifest in isolation. For travelers far from home, the shared sleeping hall provides not just physical shelter, but emotional comfort. The presence of other breathing bodies recreating some semblance of household security in foreign surroundings. The rhythmic sounds of strangers breathing becomes a substitute for family presence, creating just enough familiarity to allow surrender to sleep, despite unfamiliar surroundings. Even death doesn't entirely separate medieval sleepers. The practice of keeping vigil beside the recently deceased, the body laid out within the house for a period before burial, creates one final instance of shared sleep, though now permanently unbalanced. The living watch over the ultimate sleep of the dead, maintaining the communal nature of rest until burial finally removes the body from the household sleep arrangement. The communal bed becomes an emotional archive, witnessing births, deaths, illnesses, recoveries, arguments, reconciliations, stories, songs, and prayers. Each participant carries memories of these shared vulnerable hours, creating bonds different from those formed during daylight activities. The shared mattress holds impressions of all who have rested there, both physical depressions in its stuffing and emotional imprints in household memory. While bodies huddled close for warmth, minds wandered through dreamscapes populated by angels and demons, visitations both divine and dangerous. Yet even in the deeply internal experience of dreaming, medieval sleepers remained connected, sharing their visions upon waking, interpreting each other's dreams, collectively processing the mysterious images that emerged from shared darkness. Sleep might claim each consciousness separately, but the journey happened side by side, bodies touching beneath woolen blankets, as minds explored separate internal landscapes before returning to shared morning light. In medieval darkness, dreams weren't mere fantasies but messages, warnings, prophecies, or temptations that traveled across the permeable boundary between spiritual and material worlds. Your dream experiences in this medieval night carry significance beyond simple neural processing. They demand interpretation, perhaps spiritual intervention. They speak in symbolic languages that your waking mind must translate with care, distinguishing divine communication from demonic interference or bodily disturbance. The medieval understanding of dreams inherits ancient traditions while incorporating Christian theological frameworks. Classical authors like Artemidorus provide models for dream interpretation that survive in medieval manuscripts, categorizing visions according to their clarity, timing, and emotional resonance. These ancient frameworks merge with scriptural examples of significant dreams. Joseph's prophetic dreams in Genesis, the warnings received by the Magi, the troubled dreams of Pilate's wife, creating a complex system for evaluating nocturnal visions. Your medieval mind recognizes different categories of dreams, each requiring its own interpretative approach. The somnium or enigmatic dream speaks through symbols requiring careful decoding. The visio, or prophetic vision, reveals future events directly. The oraculum contains explicit messages or commands from divine sources. The insomnium represents mere bodily disturbances, products of indigestion, illness, or physical discomfort, with no significant meaning. The visum, or nightmare, comes from demonic sources attempting to corrupt or terrify the vulnerable sleeper. This taxonomy isn't merely academic but practical, guiding your response upon waking. A dream classified as divine requires prayerful contemplation, perhaps consultation with spiritual authorities. A nightmare demands protective prayers, maybe physical countermeasures like sprinkling holy water near your bed or hanging protective herbs above your pillow. Dreams attributed to bodily disorders might prompt dietary adjustments or herbal remedies to settle the humors believed responsible for the disturbing visions. Medieval dream interpretation operates within a fundamentally different understanding of consciousness than our own. For the medieval mind, sleep doesn't represent a shutdown of awareness, but a shift in its quality and focus. The sleeping soul remains active, potentially more receptive to spiritual influences when freed from bodily distractions. Dreams occur, not strictly within the individual mind, but in a liminal space where personal psychology, bodily conditions, and external spiritual forces intersect. The content of medieval dreams reflects daily preoccupations, but transforms them through symbolic language. Common dream motifs include falling from heights, interpreted as warnings against pride, flying, potentially representing spiritual aspiration or dangerous hubris, being chased by animals, often linked to specific sins or temptations, or encountering the dead, carrying messages from purgatory or warnings about proper burial and remembrance rituals. Dreams of food carry particular significance in a world where hunger remains a constant companion for many. Abundant feast dreams might prophesy coming plenty or conversely warn against gluttony. Dreams of specific foods connect to medical theories. Dreaming of warm, moist foods suggests an imbalance of those qualities within the body. For monastics under dietary restrictions, food dreams present special challenges, potentially indicating spiritual weakness requiring additional penance. Water appears frequently in medieval dream accounts. Rivers, oceans, floods all carrying specific meanings. Crossing water often symbolizes life transitions. Clear water suggests spiritual purity. Turbid or muddy water warns of moral contamination. Drowning dreams particularly terrify medieval dreamers, connecting to fears about improper burial and its consequences for the soul's journey after death. Royal and noble dreams receive special attention, as their nocturnal visions might contain guidance relevant to governance or dynastic concerns. Chronicles record significant dreams of monarchs, treating them as potential omens affecting the entire kingdom. These elite dreams often undergo public interpretation by trusted advisors, their meanings becoming part of political discourse and historical record. Common people's dreams receive less documentation but no less personal significance. Village-wise women might help interpret particularly troubling or unusual dreams, their experiential knowledge supplementing church teachings about dream sources and meanings. Family dreams get shared during morning activities, their potential significance debated over breakfast preparations or early chores, creating collective interpretations that blend official doctrine with folk wisdom. Recurring dreams cause particular concern, their repetition suggesting urgency in the message being conveyed. Medieval dream guides advise paying special attention to visions that return multiple nights in succession, especially if they increase in intensity or clarity. These persistent dreams might indicate unresolved spiritual issues, unfulfilled obligations to the dead, or divine messages not yet properly heeded. Children's dreams occupy a special category in medieval understanding. Their souls, considered purer and less corrupted by sin, might receive more direct divine communication. Yet their undeveloped reason also leaves them more vulnerable to deceptive visions. Parents listen carefully to children's dream accounts, seeking signs of spiritual giftedness or warning indications of demonic interest in the young soul. Nightmares, the visums that terrify sleeping minds, receive elaborate explanation in medieval thought. Physical causes include sleeping position. Lying on the back supposedly encourages disturbing visions. Improper diet. Certain foods produce noxious vapors that rise to the brain. Or imbalanced humors creating pressure on the organs of perception. Spiritual causes encompass demonic visitation, divine warning, or the soul's own guilt, manifesting in frightening imagery. Among the most feared nightmare experiences is the incubus-succubus visitation, a demonic attack taking sexual form. Modern science explains such experiences as sleep paralysis. But medieval sleepers understand them as literal encounters with supernatural entities. Protective measures against these attacks include sleeping with iron objects nearby, positioning the body appropriately, never on the back, and specific prayers recited before sleep to create spiritual boundaries around the vulnerable body. Tsaxi, night hag, or mare, that gives nightmares their name, appears in folklore throughout medieval Europe, a malevolent female entity that sits upon the sleeper's chest, restricting breathing and sending terrifying visions. Regional variations give her different names: Cauchemar in France, Alpdruck in German lands, but similar characteristics. Protective charms against her visits include positioning shoes at the bedside with toes pointing outward, placing brooms or sieves that she must count before approaching the sleeper, or hanging specific herbs with repellent properties. Dream interpretation. Manuals circulate among literate medieval populations, their contents blending ancient sources with Christian frameworks. These texts often organize dream symbols alphabetically for easy reference. From animals to celestial bodies, from common objects to unusual occurrences, the interpretations balance standardized meanings with contextual factors. The dreamer's age, gender, social position, and current life circumstances all affecting how a particular symbol should be understood. The timing of dreams carries significance in medieval understanding. Dreams occurring just after falling asleep are considered least reliable, still contaminated by daily concerns and undigested experiences. Those arriving in deepest night, particularly during the hours before dawn, carry greater prophetic potential. Dreams recurring at the same hour. Multiple nights in succession demand special attention, their temporal precision suggesting deliberate communication rather than random mental wandering. Certain saints develop special associations with dreams and their interpretation. Saint Nicholas becomes a patron of dreamers, his intercession sought by those troubled by recurring nightmares. Saint Michael offers protection against demonic dream attacks. Most significantly, the Virgin Mary emerges as a frequent dream visitor, her appearances in sleep considered especially blessed communications, meriting careful recording and contemplation. Medieval monastic practice develops sophisticated approaches to dreams as potential sites of both divine communication and demonic temptation. The Desert Fathers' writings provide guidance for discerning dream sources, warning that demons might send seemingly pious visions to engender spiritual pride. Regular confession includes discussion of significant dreams, positioning them within broader spiritual development, and watching for patterns that might indicate either progress or vulnerability. For ordinary medieval sleepers, biblical dreams. provide templates for understanding their own nocturnal experiences. Joseph's ability to interpret dreams becomes a model for proper discernment. Jacob's ladder vision offers precedent for dreams as sites of divine human contact. The prophetic dreams scattered throughout Scripture legitimize taking dreams seriously, while also demanding careful evaluation of their sources and messages. Physical positioning during sleep is believed to influence dream content and quality. Medieval medical texts advise sleeping initially on the right side to aid digestion, then shifting to the left side for deeper sleep and more spiritually significant dreams. Sleeping face down supposedly encourages disturbing visions. Sleeping face up leaves the sleeper vulnerable to supernatural visitation. These positional theories connect bodily arrangement to the quality of dreams, suggesting that proper physical preparation creates conditions for beneficial, rather than harmful nighttime experiences. Upon waking from especially significant dreams, medieval people developed various response rituals. Some dreams demand immediate telling to dissipate potential negative energy or to fix the details before they fade. Others require silent contemplation, the dreamer holding the vision privately until its meaning becomes clearer. Particularly troubling dreams might prompt immediate prayer or small protective actions, sprinkling salt near the bed, opening windows to release lingering spiritual influences, or making the sign of the cross over the sleeping area. While bodies, huddled close for warmth, minds wandered through dreamscapes populated by angels and demons, visitations both divine and dangerous. These nocturnal journeys weren't merely personal but communal experiences, shared through morning recounting, collectively interpreted, their meanings woven into the fabric of medieval understanding. Each dream formed a potential bridge between visible and invisible worlds, between the individual soul and larger cosmic patterns, between daily life and divine plan, making sleep not just rest, but an active spiritual territory where significant communication might arrive in any night's dark hours. Darkness brought vulnerability, and with it, the need for vigilance. While most medieval bodies surrendered to sleep's necessity, others remained deliberately wakeful, their assigned purpose to guard the communal slumber. Your medieval night includes these watchful figures, men carrying lanterns through darkened streets, calling the hours, monitoring for dangers both mundane and extraordinary that might threaten sleeping towns. The medieval night watch emerges from practical necessity in a world where darkness creates perfect conditions for crime, fire, and external attack. Early medieval communities organize informal rotating watches, with householders taking turns patrolling their immediate neighborhoods. As towns grow larger and more complex, professional watchmen appear, men specifically employed to remain awake while others sleep, their alertness purchased by communal funds for community protection. These watchmen create a distinctive soundscape that permeates medieval sleep. The call of hours punctuates the night. 10 o'clock and all's well, echoing through narrow streets, penetrating shuttered windows to reach sleeping ears. These calls serve multiple purposes, confirming the watchman's continued alertness, marking time's passage for those who wake briefly in the night, and providing reassurance that someone remains vigilant against dangers. The medieval watch carries physical tools reflecting their responsibilities. Lanterns provide both practical illumination and symbolic presence. The moving light visible from windows announcing the watch's active patrol. Wooden rattles or small bells create distinctive sounds, allowing watchmen to communicate with each other across distances. Many carry staffs or halberds, weapons sufficient for confronting minor disturbances, but primarily serving as badges of authority rather than serious armaments. Watch stations positioned throughout larger towns create fixed points where citizens might find help during night emergencies. These stations, often simple wooden shelters providing minimal protection from weather. House watchmen during inclement conditions, while maintaining visibility of key streets or intersections. In the smallest communities, the church itself might serve as watch headquarters, its tower providing elevated vantage points for monitoring the surrounding settlement. Curfew laws form a complementary system to the night watch, restricting movement rather than simply monitoring it. The word curfew itself derives from the French couvre-feu, or cover fire, referring to the original practice of covering hearth fires at a designated evening hour. This fire safety measure expands into broader control of nighttime activities, with curfew bells signaling the time when respectable citizens should be in their homes and off public streets. These curfew systems vary by location and historical period. Early medieval curfews primarily address fire prevention, focusing on proper banking of coals and extinguishing open flames. Later medieval urban curfews add social control dimensions, restricting movement of specific populations, limiting tavern hours, prohibiting weapons after dark. The enforcement grows increasingly sophisticated, with different rules for different classes, professions, and neighborhoods within the same town. The relationship between sleep and curfew creates interesting temporal patterns. Curfew hours typically align with natural sleep times, beginning shortly after sunset and lifting with dawn. But they formalize these patterns, adding legal consequences to remaining awake and active during normal sleeping hours. Your medieval sleep becomes not just biological necessity, but legal obligation, your presence in bed officially mandated during designated hours. Exceptions to curfew reveal the complexity of medieval night. Certain professions receive formal exemption: physicians visiting patients, midwives attending births, priests responding to deathbed confession requests. These necessary nighttime movements require documentation, written permissions, distinctive lanterns, or verbal passwords, allowing legitimate travelers to identify themselves to suspicious watchmen. The enforcement of curfew falls primarily to the watch, creating a system where some must remain awake specifically to ensure others are properly asleep. Watchmen check for improperly secured doors, for lights burning beyond permitted hours, for voices or music indicating forbidden gatherings. They possess authority to question anyone found on streets after curfew bells, to escort home those with legitimate reasons for movement, and to detain those without satisfactory explanation. Punishments for curfew violation reflect both practical and symbolic concerns. Early medieval penalties focus on community safety. Fines used to maintain watch equipment or repair defensive structures. Later systems develop more elaborate consequences, including public shaming for minor violations, temporary imprisonment for repeated offences, and suspicion of more serious criminality for habitual night wanderers. Certain social groups face particular scrutiny under curfew systems. Foreigners and travellers, lacking established community connections, must often register their presence and sleeping location with town authorities. Young unmarried men, considered particularly prone to night mischief, encounter stricter enforcement and harsher penalties. The poor, especially those without fixed residences, navigate complex rules about where they may legitimately sleep when they have no proper home to return to at curfew's sound. The enforcement of sleep timing through curfew creates resistance in medieval culture. Illicit gatherings continue despite prohibition. Clandestine religious meetings, forbidden romantic encounters, illegal gambling sessions all claim nighttime hours specifically because official attention focuses elsewhere. These forbidden wakeful activities gain power precisely because they violate not just legal statutes, but natural rhythms, their practitioners deliberately inverting normal patterns of activity and rest. Medieval literature reflects this tension between mandated sleep and forbidden wakefulness. Night wanderers in poetry and stories carry complex symbolic weight, sometimes romanticized as lovers or spiritual seekers, sometimes demonized as criminals or agents of supernatural harm. The deliberate inversion of sleep becomes both transgressive act and literary device. The wakeful figure moving through sleeping society, representing various forms of social disruption or transformation. Castle watches operate under different principles than town systems, their primary concern being external military threat rather than internal order. These watchers occupy towers and wall positions, their vigilance more silent than the calling town watch. They watch for torches signaling approaching armies, listen for unusual sounds indicating potential siege preparations, monitor for infiltration, attempts exploiting darkness for cover. Their wakefulness protects not just physical safety, but political stability, the continuing rule of the Lord whose castle they guard. Rural areas develop less formal but equally important night watch systems. Villages too small for professional watchmen rotate responsibility among households, each taking turns ensuring communal safety. These rural watches focus particularly on livestock protection, monitoring for wolves or human thieves targeting animals whose value might represent a significant portion of village wealth. The rural watchman's territory covers not just human habitation, but surrounding fields and animal enclosures, his responsibility extending to the natural resources on which community survival depends. Weather creates additional night watch responsibilities. Winter watches. Monitor for snowfall blocking critical roads or excessive ice creating structural dangers to be addressed at dawn. Summer drought periods bring increased fire vigilance, with watches specifically tasked with smelling for smoke and responding immediately to ignition risks. Flooding seasons near rivers add monitoring water levels to regular duties, preparing to wake sleeping households if rapid evacuation becomes necessary. The medieval watch marks time differently than daylight hours. While daylight time divides into practical segments based on work activities, night hours maintain more consistent measurement, typically divided into watches of fixed duration, often 3 or 4 hours each with specific names and characteristics. This different temporal experience creates a separate culture among habitual night workers, their conversation and concerns focused on aspects of darkness invisible to day dwellers. Your medieval sleep occurs within this complex system of monitoring and control. The footsteps of the watch passing your window, the distant call of hours, the knowledge that wakeful eyes patrol while you dream, all create a distinctive psychological relationship to sleep. Your surrender to unconsciousness happens within a social framework that both respects sleep's necessity and treats wakeful wandering with suspicion, that provides protection for the vulnerable unconscious body while restricting its movement and activity during darkness. For travelers sleeping in unfamiliar locations, the watch provides both reassurance and potential complication. The sound of a watch call confirms you've reached a reasonably organized settlement with basic safety measures. Yet these same watchmen might regard you with suspicion, your unfamiliar face and accent marking you as potentially dangerous to the community's slumbering peace. You learn to secure proper documentation, to establish legitimate business, to identify yourself to the watch before settling into sleep in a new location. As watchmen patrolled the streets calling the hours, other guardians kept watch over sleeping souls, the silent sentinels of hearth and home. These domestic protections operated on different principles than the municipal watch, but shared the fundamental purpose of securing vulnerable sleepers against darkness's dangers. The medieval night required multiple systems of vigilance, some human, some spiritual, some mechanical, to create sufficient safety for bodies to surrender to unconsciousness in a world where darkness still held both practical and metaphysical threats. The hearth fire was more than warmth. It was a boundary between civilization and chaos, a living presence that required tending through darkness's watches. Your medieval sleep unfolds in relationship to this controlled flame, its light creating shifting shadows on walls, its heat determining comfortable sleeping distance, its maintenance demanding periodic waking attention throughout the night. This fire anchors the sleeping household, providing practical necessity and symbolic continuity from evening's activities to morning's renewal. Medieval sleeping areas organized themselves around the hearth's influence. In single-room dwellings, sleepers arranged their bodies in relationship to the fire's radius, the very young, very old, or ill positioned closest to benefit from maximum warmth, the young and healthy accepting greater distance and corresponding chill. The fire creates microclimates within the sleeping space, invisible gradations of temperature that household members navigate according to need and status. The preparation of the night fire follows careful protocols developed through generations of experience. The evening's cooking flames transition to sleeping configuration through deliberate arrangement of logs and embers. Large pieces of wood position themselves at specific angles. Ashes bank carefully around still glowing coals. Sometimes special night logs, particularly dense or resinous specimens saved specifically for slow burning, take central position, their composition calculated to maintain minimal heat with maximum duration. This banking of coals represents essential knowledge transmitted from parent to child through practical demonstration. The properly prepared night fire balances contradictory needs, remaining active enough to be rekindled easily in morning, but contained enough to pose minimal danger during unconscious hours. The technique preserves precious fire without requiring constant waking attention, allowing human bodies to rest while the flame maintains its muted vigilance. Different woods serve different purposes in the night fire. Oak provides long-lasting coals, its density burning slowly through darkness. Birch offers cleaner smoke for homes without proper chimneys. Pine and other resinous woods, while providing cheerful light, require greater caution during sleep hours due to their tendency to spark. Household knowledge includes understanding which combinations work best for particular seasons, weather conditions, and sleeping arrangements. Fire management becomes more complex in larger households with multiple hearths. Great houses maintain hierarchy in their fire distribution, the Lord's chamber receiving finest woods and most attentive banking, lesser rooms making do with simpler arrangements or extinguished flames replaced by braziers with charcoal. Servants responsible for maintaining appropriate fire conditions throughout the night move quietly through darkened passageways, checking chambers according to their occupants, status and needs. Beyond practical heating, the night fire serves psychological functions essential to medieval sleep. The soft illumination creates a middle ground between complete darkness and waking light, a transitional state that eases the boundary between consciousness and dreams. The gentle crackling provides white noise masking smaller sounds that might otherwise disturb light sleepers. The visual focus of shifting embers gives restless minds something to contemplate when sleep proves elusive, a meditative point drawing thoughts away from anxieties or discomforts. Fire safety creates tension. In medieval sleep arrangements, practical necessity places fire near enough to warm sleeping bodies, while danger awareness demands sufficient distance to prevent disaster during unconscious hours. Households develop physical barriers, stone platforms, metal screens, architectural features like raised hearths that balance accessibility with containment. These protective measures evolve through bitter experience, each innovation often traceable to specific historical fires that claimed sleeping victims. Some households employ dedicated fire watchers, often the youngest or oldest family members who require less complete sleep. These semi-wakeful guardians occupy positions allowing observation of flames, their responsibility consisting mainly of alertness to changes in fire behavior. They represent a human insurance policy against the devastating consequences of fire, escaping control while others sleep too deeply to respond to early warning signs. The reliance on fire creates seasonal variations in medieval sleep patterns. Winter nights demand substantial flames for survival, the coldest hours often prompting someone to rise briefly for feeding additional fuel to dying embers. Summer allows more minimal fire maintenance, sometimes permitting complete extinguishing, with only rekindling tools prepared for morning. These seasonal rhythms connect sleep not just to darkness, but to temperature cycles, to availability of fuel, to changing calculations of necessity versus conservation. For the poorest medieval sleepers, night fires represent significant economic calculations. Fuel gathering consumes precious daylight hours, the wood or peat or coal acquired through labor that competes with other survival needs. These households make complex decisions about when fire justifies its cost in gathered resources, sometimes choosing to sleep cold rather than expend fuel beyond cooking necessity. Their sleep reflects literal embeddedness in economic reality, their body's comfort directly contingent on their access to combustible materials. Symbolic associations enhance the night fire's significance beyond practical considerations. Medieval folklore connects the hearth fire to household continuity, its maintenance representing family persistence through generations. Extinction of the family fire signifies deeper disruptions, abandonment of homes, ending of bloodlines, loss of place within community frameworks. Conversely, the passing of fire from one generation's keeping to the next symbolizes legitimate inheritance, proper transfer of family identity and responsibility. Religious practices often incorporate the night fire into protective rituals. Evening prayers frequently include specific references to fire safety, invoking divine protection for the vulnerable sleeping household. Some traditions include symbolic marking of the hearth with crosses or other protective signs before sleep. The act of banking coals often accompanies final evening devotions, the physical preparation of fire for night occurring simultaneously with spiritual preparation of souls for darkness. The sound of the night fire creates another dimension of its presence, an auditory companion through dark hours, the settling of logs, the minute explosions of heated sap pockets, the shifting of ash around glowing embers. These sounds become so fundamental to sleep environments that their absence creates discomfort, a silence too complete to allow proper rest. The fire's voice joins human breathing and settling timbers in the acoustic experience of medieval night. Dreams often incorporate the fire's influence, both through physical effects on sleeping bodies and psychological integration of its significance. Dreams of catastrophic flames may reflect actual changes in the hearth, perhaps a collapsed log creating momentary flare that penetrates sleeping awareness. Comforting dreams of warmth and protection might mirror the physical sensation of heat against exposed skin. The transition between sleeping and waking states frequently occurs in relationship to fire conditions, a chill from dying embers, prompting enough wakefulness to address the need before returning to deeper sleep. Morning's interaction with the night fire creates another significant threshold. The first household member rising prioritizes rekindling flames to full waking strength. This transition from banked coals to active fire symbolizes the household's return to conscious functioning, the shift from vulnerable stasis to productive activity. Success in this rekindling represents proper maintenance during night hours. Failure necessitates the laborious process of striking new fire. an admission that night watch failed in its fire-tending responsibilities. Cultural differences in fire management reflect broader attitudes towards sleep and night. Northern European traditions emphasize continuous fire maintenance, with techniques focused on preservation through longest darkness. Mediterranean approaches might allow complete extinguishing, with greater emphasis on morning rekindling. These regional variations reflect not just climate differences, but cultural attitudes toward night's meaning and proper human relationship to darkness hours. The poorest medieval households sometimes practice fire borrowing when their own hearths fail during night. Early risers discovering cold ashes might visit neighbors to request live coals for rekindling, a practice both practical and deeply symbolic. This borrowing creates community bonds, establishing relationships of interdependence around the essential technology of controlled flame. Refusal to share fire becomes a serious social transgression, marking the refusing household as standing outside networks of reciprocal obligation. Medieval monastic communities developed particularly sophisticated approaches to night fires. Their rules often containing detailed instructions for flame maintenance between evening and morning prayers. Designated brothers receive responsibility for checking dormitory heating at specific night offices, their attention to physical warmth paralleling the community's attention to spiritual conditions during darkness. The monastery fire becomes another expression of the order and regularity governing all aspects of communal life, its maintenance as ritualized as the prayers marking nocturnal hours. As the embers glowed like dying stars, the night sky above thatched roofs held its own stories and rhythms. While the hearth fire represented human control over elemental forces, the celestial fires overhead embodied larger patterns beyond mortal influence. Medieval sleepers positioned themselves between these two fire realms, the managed flame at their feet and the uncontrollable stars above, their bodies suspended between immediate physical necessity and cosmic frameworks that govern time's larger passage. This position between fires reflected the medieval sleeper's fundamental condition, embodied creatures with material needs yet embedded within spiritual and astronomical systems that transcended individual experience. In a world without artificial light, the celestial bodies above weren't merely distant observers, they were timekeepers, mood setters, and according to medieval belief, direct influencers of human physiology. As you lay beneath your humble roof, the moon traced its silvery path across the night sky, its glow filtering through shuttered windows, or the occasional thin opening in thatched roofs. Medieval people understood their sleep to be intimately connected with these celestial movements in ways we've largely forgotten. The moon, in particular, held special significance. Its waxing and waning wasn't simply a visual spectacle, but a physical force believed to pull not just at the tides, but at the very humors that medieval medicine understood to regulate the human body. During the full moon, many reported heightened dreams and restlessness, a phenomenon still noted by some sleep researchers today. Medieval physicians would often advise against making important decisions or beginning medical treatments during certain lunar phases, believing the moon's position could influence outcomes by affecting the quality of rest and mental clarity. Blood rises with the waxing moon, warned medical texts from Salerno, cautioning that sleep during this period might be more disturbed as the lunar pull affected the body's humoral balance. The new moon, by contrast, was considered a time of deepened sleep and healing. Farmers and shepherds, whose livelihoods depended on accurate natural observation, maintained that animals slept differently according to lunar phases. An insight they extended to human rest as well. The seasons, too, dictated sleep in ways almost entirely lost to our climate-controlled bedrooms. Winter brought what medieval people called the Great Sleep, longer nights that extended human rest far beyond our modern average. You might retire shortly after sunset around 4 or 5 p.m. in December and not fully rise until 7 or 8 a.m. Sleeping patterns that would see a modern doctor diagnosing depression, but were perfectly normal in medieval Europe. These extended winter sleeps were not just longer, but different in quality. The darkness invited deeper rest, with the silence of snow-muffled landscapes creating a stillness that's become nearly impossible to experience in our humming, electric-lit world. There's a profound surrender in winter sleep that medieval people accepted as natural, the body conserving energy like the dormant seeds beneath frozen soil. Summer brought its own patterns, shorter but often sweeter sleep. With sunset extending until 9 p.m. or later in northern regions, evening activities stretched longer, and morning work began with the early dawn. Yet these briefer summer sleeps carried their own character. Windows might be left open to catch cooling breezes, and sleepers often rested atop rather than under blankets, their skin touched by night air in a sensory experience few modern sleepers know. The equinoxes, spring and autumn, were considered particularly balanced times for rest when neither heat nor cold disturbed the body's natural rhythms. Many medieval health manuals suggested these as ideal times for regulating disturbed sleep patterns, much as modern sleep therapists might recommend establishing new routines during seasonal transitions. Stars, too, featured prominently in medieval sleep consciousness. Certain constellations were believed to influence dreams when visible above one's sleeping form. The Pleiades, or Seven Sisters, were thought to bring prophetic visions when they reached their zenith, while sleeping under Orion's gaze supposedly brought strength to the weary body. For seafarers and travelers, these celestial bodies were not just influences, but companions in the vulnerable act of sleep. Many would recite specific prayers to stars before sleeping outdoors, requesting protection through the watches of the night. Star of the sea, many sailors would whisper to the North Star, guide my soul as you guide my ship, while my conscious mind finds harbour in sleep. The profound darkness of the medieval night revealed celestial movements hidden from most modern eyes by light pollution. Meteor showers, eclipses, and even the subtle drift of planets against the backdrop of stars were natural midnight shows for anyone who woke during their first and second sleeps. These celestial events were integrated into the medieval understanding of sleep quality. An eclipse occurring overhead was thought to disturb dreams and potentially cause nightmares. Children were taught to identify protective stars and constellations from an early age, creating a connection between restful sleep and the twinkling guardians above. The angels light their lamps to watch over sleeping children, mothers would explain, pointing to particularly bright stars visible through cottage windows. This celestial connection to sleep extended to birth and death as well. The constellations present at one's birth were thought to influence lifetime sleep patterns, while those visible at death were believed to guide the soul to its eternal rest. Medieval people experienced a profound connection between their most vulnerable states and the vast movements of the cosmos, a relationship that made sleep not just a biological necessity, but a participant in the greater rhythms of existence. The changing length of days throughout the year became internalized in ways modern humans, with our electric extensions of daylight, can barely comprehend. Your body would know, at a cellular level, the season outside. Winter sleep felt different in your limbs, heavier, more encompassing than the lighter, shorter rest of midsummer nights. This wasn't just psychological but physiological, with modern research confirming that humans once synchronized their melatonin production more closely with seasonal light changes before artificial illumination disrupted these patterns. As you lay tonight in your 21st century bed, perhaps you might glance out your window at whatever stars remain visible through the haze of modernity. and feel for a moment what your ancestors knew with certainty, that your sleep is part of something much larger than yourself, a cosmic dance that continues whether we acknowledge it or not. The same moon that watched over medieval dreamers still traces its path above your roof, and some part of your body still responds to its ancient pull, even if your conscious mind has forgotten how to listen. While the moon traced its path across the night sky, those unable to find rest sought remedies both practical and magical. For the restless medieval mind, the boundary between medicine and magic blurred most distinctly at bedtime. Sleep remedies combined empirical plant knowledge, passed down through generations with incantations, blessings, and ritual gestures that would seem foreign to modern pharmacology. Yet within this blend of approaches lay an understanding of sleep's complexity that in some ways surpasses our clinical, compartmentalized view today. Herbs formed the foundation of medieval sleep medicines, many of which modern science has validated for their mild sedative properties. Chamomile, valerian, and hops, all still found in natural sleep aids today, were regular features in the medieval sleep toolkit. These weren't simply consumed as modern tea bags might be, but prepared with reverence and specific timing believed to enhance their potency. Valerian root, with its distinctive earthy odor, was harvested preferably during specific lunar phases and dried carefully before being steeped into strong decoctions. Its effectiveness against insomnia, now attributed to compounds that interact with GABA receptors in the brain, was explained in medieval terms as cooling the humours and settling the animal spirits that cause wakefulness. Chamomile flowers, particularly prized for helping children settle into sleep, were often collected by women who recited specific prayers or charms while gathering them, believing that the plant's sleep-inducing properties were connected to the blessing of St. John, under whose feast day they often bloomed most abundantly. The flowers would be dried and then prepared not just through simple infusion, but sometimes mixed with honey to sweeten dreams, or combined with lavender to keep night terrors at bay. Lettuce, particularly wild varieties, features prominently in medieval sleep remedies in ways that might surprise modern insomniacs. The white sap from lettuce stems contains lactucarium, a mild sedative, and medieval herbalists recommended that sleepless individuals consume young lettuce with dinner, or apply the sap directly to the temples. Manuscripts from monastery gardens show careful attention to growing varieties specifically for their sleep-inducing properties. For those of higher status, imported substances expanded the sleep pharmacy. Saffron, extraordinarily expensive, and, derived from crocus flowers, was considered particularly effective for promoting restful sleep without morning drowsiness. Its golden color associated it with the sun, creating a sympathetic magic wherein consuming the essence of daylight was thought to grant control over darkness and night. More accessible to common folk were local plants like linden flowers, passion flower, and even humble lettuce leaves, which contain natural sedative compounds. These would be prepared as sleep pillows, small sachets stuffed with dried herbs placed beneath regular pillows, where their scent would be inhaled throughout the night. The warmth of the sleeper's body would release the volatile compounds from the herbs, creating a slow-release aromatherapy that modern studies have found genuinely effective for extending sleep duration. Animal products, too, found their way into sleep remedies, though many of these veered more firmly into magical thinking. Badger fat rubbed on the chest was believed to prevent nightmares, while wearing a dormouse skin, the animal known for its hibernation, was recommended in some texts for chronic insomniacs. Bear grease, particularly difficult to obtain but highly valued, was thought to transfer the animal's ability for deep winter sleep to humans struggling with insomnia. For the wealthy, more exotic recommendations included powdered pearl dissolved in wine before bed. An expensive remedy that likely had more placebo effect than pharmacological impact. Yet the ceremony of preparing and consuming such luxurious sleep aids created psychological conditions conducive to rest, highlighting how medieval sleep medicine often understood the importance of pre-sleep ritual and expectation. Beyond herbs and animal products lay the realm of sleep stones and minerals. Amethyst, whose purple color and name derived from Greek words meaning not intoxicated, was believed to promote clear-headed, sober sleep free from nightmares. These purple crystals would be placed beneath pillows or worn as pendants that touched the skin during sleep. Similarly, celestite's pale blue color associated it with clear skies and peaceful rest, making it a favored stone to keep near the bedside. Most households, unable to afford such luxuries, turned to more accessible items. Iron keys placed under pillows were thought to lock out bad dreams, while river stones collected on specific holy days could anchor the sleeper safely through the night. The material objects themselves mattered less than the belief systems in which they were embedded. Religious remedies formed another layer of sleep medicine. Among the most common was the practice of drawing a cross over one's pillow before sleep, creating an invisible boundary of protection. Others might whisper the names of sleep-associated saints: Saint Dormeur for peaceful sleep, Saint Dymphna for those troubled by mental anxieties, or Saint Joseph, patron of peaceful death, for those who fear dying in their sleep, a common medieval anxiety. The Compline prayers, the final church office before sleep, served as psychological transitions between wakefulness and rest. Even those who didn't attend church services often recited simplified versions of these prayers before bed. Visit, we beseech thee, O Lord, this dwelling, and drive far from it all snares of the enemy. Let thy holy angels dwell herein to preserve us in peace. The rhythm of familiar words created a mental state conducive to surrender into sleep. For particularly persistent insomnia, more elaborate rituals might be employed. Counting backward from 1,000 in Latin was recommended. For the educated, combining mental fatigue with the rhythm of a learned language. Others might recite the names of ancestors as far back as they could remember, believing this connection to those already sleeping in death would help draw the living into sleep's embrace. Some remedies mixed practical sleep hygiene with supernatural elements. Washing feet before bed, now recognized as helping regulate body temperature for better sleep, was often accompanied by specific prayers referencing Christ washing the disciples' feet. The practical and spiritual intertwined in ways that addressed both physical and psychological aspects of sleep. Diet, too, featured prominently in medieval sleep wisdom. Heavy evening meals were generally discouraged, with lighter fare recommended as darkness approached. Specific foods were associated with better sleep. Almonds, containing magnesium, a natural muscle relaxant. Honey in warm milk, boosting tryptophan, a sleep-promoting amino acid. And lettuce, for its mild sedative properties. Certain foods were explicitly avoided before bed, particularly those considered heating to the humors, such as strong spices and red meat. For children, sleep remedies took special forms. Lullabies, of course, provided auditory soothing, but many contained references to herbs and protective measures woven into their lyrics. A common English lullaby mentioning lavender blue wasn't just poetic, but referenced the lavender placed in children's bedding. Small sachet balls filled with chamomile might be sewn into the corners of children's sleeping pallets, releasing calming scents when they tossed and turned. The effectiveness of these remedies varied widely, of course. Some, like valerian and hops, have demonstrable mild sedative properties confirmed by modern science. Others worked primarily through the power of ritual and belief, creating conditions of psychological comfort that allowed the vulnerable surrender into sleep. But perhaps most significant was how these approaches recognized sleep as requiring both physical and spiritual preparation, a holistic understanding often missing from our compartmentalized modern approach to insomnia. As you lie tonight in your bed, surrounded by your particular sleep aids, perhaps melatonin supplements, white noise machines, or carefully engineered mattresses, consider how your medieval ancestors might have approached your sleep struggles. They might have offered you not just herbs to consume, but rituals to embrace, not just physical remedies, but ways to settle your spirit. Their wisdom reminds us that sleep has always been a surrender, requiring both body and mind to cross together into vulnerability and trust. These ancient remedies carried whispers of wisdom that would echo through centuries, not unlike the stories that lulled medieval children into dreams. In the flickering light of dying embers, as shadows danced, upon medieval walls like spirits untethered from their corporeal forms, the human voice became a bridge between wakefulness and dreams. Words had power, especially in darkness, where stories painted worlds behind closed eyelids and wove protective enchantments around vulnerable sleepers. Unlike our modern bedtime routines with printed storybooks and digital recordings, medieval bedtime tales emerged from memory and improvisation, passed through generations like precious heirlooms that required no physical form. A grandmother's whispered tales of saints and miracles, a father's low rumble recounting heroic deeds of old. These were the lullabies that carried medieval children across the threshold into sleep's mysterious realm. The stories told at bedtime served purposes beyond mere entertainment, explains medieval folklore historian Maria Tatar. They reinforced social boundaries, explained natural phenomena, and provided models for proper behavior, all while easing the transition into vulnerable sleep states. For the medieval mind, these tales were not fiction as we understand it today. The dragons lurking in forests, the saints intervening in daily affairs, the fairies stealing unattended children. These existed in a twilight realm between factual and fantastical. When a mother warned her children about leaving their beds at night lest the changelings take them, it was practical advice wrapped in mythical language, keeping little ones safely tucked away from very real dangers like drafts, fires, or predators. The melodies of medieval lullabies drifted through humble cottages and grand chambers alike, carried on voices worn rough from daily labour or refined through courtly training. These songs often incorporated elements of religious devotion, turning the act of sleep into a sacred surrender. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee all through the night," went one Welsh lullaby that has survived in recognizable form. "Guardian angels God will send thee all through the night." Such lyrics reveal the complex spiritual landscape of medieval slumber, the belief that invisible guardians watched over the vulnerable sleeper, that prayers could serve as shields against nocturnal threats. A sleeping child was both blessed and endangered, requiring both divine and earthly protection through the medium of song. Class distinctions manifested even in these intimate moments. While peasant children might hear tales of clever commoners outwitting supernatural beings, noble offspring listened to stories of their illustrious ancestors, their bedtime narratives serving as genealogical instruction even as consciousness faded. Yet certain motifs transcended social boundaries: the triumph of virtue, the punishment of transgression, the restoration of proper order. What's fascinating about medieval bedtime storytelling is its inherent contradiction, notes cultural historian Robert Darnton. It needed to be engaging enough to capture attention, but soothing enough to release it, frightening enough to acknowledge real fears, but comforting enough to overcome them. This delicate balance produced narratives with distinctive rhythms and repetitions that survive in our fairy tales today. The magical number 3, the quest structure, the formulaic openings and closings, these elements served as predictable frameworks that gradually lulled active minds towards sleep's gentle surrender. For adults, bedtime stories took different forms. Monks might listen to hagiographies, tales of saints whose virtuous lives provided models for emulation during waking hours and spiritual protection during vulnerable sleep. Nobles might request minstrels to perform calming ballads as they prepared. For rest, the rhythmic verses creating a transitional space between day's demands and night's release. Perhaps most poignantly, these bedtime traditions created emotional bridges between generations. A child listening to the same tales their parent had heard decades earlier formed connections that transcended time, binding medieval families in shared imaginative experiences even as they closed their eyes to different dreams. In a culture without photographs or home videos, explains family historian Barbara Hannawalt, these shared narrative moments created profound bonds of identity and belonging. The stories told at bedside became the stories that defined who you were and where you belonged. As you lie in your own bed tonight, surrounded by technologies medieval people could never have imagined, perhaps you can still feel the echo of those ancient tales, the archetypal motifs that have survived centuries, because they speak to something timeless about human fears and hopes in the vulnerable space between consciousness and dreams. The medieval storyteller would lower their voice as the child's eyelids grew heavy, modulating their cadence to match slowing breaths, the narrative thread deliberately loosening to allow the transition into sleep's gentle embrace. And as the child finally surrendered to slumber, the story would continue softly for a few more moments, creating a protective auditory canopy under which dreams could safely unfold. While children drifted off to tales of saints and heroes, adults faced their own nocturnal challenges, navigating a darkness filled with threats both spiritual and physical. What we now understand as sleep disorders were once visitors from beyond. Incubi, succubi, and night hags pressing down upon the chest of the helpless sleeper, their supernatural weight crushing breath and hope alike. The medieval night was populated not just with physical dangers, but with spiritual predators that stalked the vulnerable soul when consciousness retreated. Imagine waking suddenly, unable to move, feeling an oppressive weight upon your chest as a shadowy figure looms over you. In our modern world, you might recognize this as sleep paralysis, a neurological phenomenon where the mind awakens before the body's natural paralysis during REM sleep has dissipated. But in medieval Europe, this terrifying experience had a very different explanation. You were being visited by a night hag, an incubus, or some other malevolent entity. The nightmare, from which we get our modern term nightmare, was originally understood as a nocturnal demon that sat upon sleepers' chests, explains medical historian Roger E. Kirch. These night visitors were believed to cause not just frightening dreams but physical symptoms of breathlessness and pressure that we can now identify as sleep paralysis. Medieval medical texts catalogue these nocturnal afflictions with methodical precision. The influential 12th century medical encyclopedia Causae et Curae, attributed to Hildegard of Bingen, described various sleep disturbances and their supposed causes, from dietary excess to spiritual corruption. Physicians might diagnose nocturnal epilepsy or suffocation of the mother, a term for what we now recognize as sleep paralysis, prescribing remedies that blended practical advice with spiritual intervention. For the sleepwalker who rose from bed to wander through darkened halls, medieval explanations varied from demonic possession to an imbalance of the four humours. These unfortunate souls might be restrained at night for their own protection, or subjected to exorcisms if their nocturnal wanderings seemed particularly unnatural. The boundaries between medical and spiritual understanding remained fluid, with physical symptoms often attributed to moral or supernatural causes. Medieval people understood the vulnerability of sleep profoundly, notes historian Catherine Hines. During these hours, when the conscious will surrendered control, the soul was believed to be particularly susceptible to both divine inspiration and demonic influence. This conceptual framework transformed insomnia from merely an inconvenience into a spiritual crisis. The inability to sleep might be interpreted as divine punishment, demonic harassment, or the consequence of a guilty conscience. Chronic insomniacs might find themselves under suspicion. For what sin or secret were they? Being denied the blessed relief of sleep. Particularly feared was the condition we now call night terrors, where sleepers, often children, would suddenly scream and thrash in apparent terror while remaining fundamentally asleep. These episodes, frightening enough in our scientific age, must have seemed truly supernatural to medieval observers. Parents might seek both medical intervention and spiritual protection, gathering herbs to place beneath pillows while simultaneously arranging for priestly blessings. Even the phenomenon of talking in one's sleep carried mystical significance. The sleeping voice was believed to bypass conscious control, potentially revealing hidden truths or functioning as an oracle. A sleeping person who spoke might be channeling divine wisdom, confessing to hidden sins, or revealing secrets they'd never consciously divulge. Protective practices against these nocturnal afflictions blended pragmatic approaches with spiritual safeguards. Prayers said before bed created invisible shields against demonic intrusion. Specific saints were invoked for peaceful rest. Saint Dymphna for troubled minds, Saint Benedict against poisoning and nightmares. Physical objects served protective functions as well, a knife placed beneath the mattress, iron near the bed, or herbs with reputed magical properties tucked into pillowcases. The medieval bedroom was essentially a fortress against supernatural threat, explains cultural anthropologist Claude Lecouteau. Every element from the arrangement of furniture to the positioning of religious icons served to create concentric circles of protection around the vulnerable sleeper. For those who could afford them, blessed talismans might be worn to bed or hung from bedposts. A particular type of carved stone called hagstones, natural rocks with holes worn through them, were believed to allow sleepers to see through fairy glamours and demonic disguises. More elaborate protective measures might include sleeping with particular prayers written on parchment placed beneath the pillow, or using bed curtains that had been blessed and sprinkled with holy water. The emotional burden of these nocturnal afflictions was perhaps even greater than their physical toll. To experience sleep disorders in a world without scientific explanation meant questioning one's spiritual standing, moral worth, or even humanity itself. Those who suffered chronic sleep disturbances might wonder if they had been specially targeted by supernatural forces, either as punishment for sin or because they possessed some quality that attracted malevolent attention. For the medieval sleeper, the boundary between night terrors and actual spiritual experiences remained perpetually ambiguous. The same framework that interpreted sleep disorders as supernatural attacks also acknowledged the possibility of genuine divine visitations during sleep. This created a complex interpretive challenge. Was your midnight terror a symptom to be treated or a message to be decoded? As you rest in your scientifically understood bed tonight, perhaps you might find comfort in how much less frightening our sleep disruptions have become. No longer must we fear that our insomnia marks us for divine punishment or that our sleep paralysis signifies demonic harassment. Yet something has been lost as well. The sense that our dreams and nightmares might carry messages from beyond, that our sleeping minds might access truths unavailable to waking consciousness. As the midnight oil burned low in noble houses, different spectres haunted those who could not afford such luxuries. The very real dangers that stalked the darkened medieval town. Darkness brought vulnerability, and with it, the need for vigilance. While spiritual guardians might be invoked to protect the sleeping soul, medieval communities required more tangible sentinels to safeguard their physical security. As you drifted towards sleep in your medieval bed, the rhythmic call of the night watchman might filter through your shuttered window, a human presence patrolling the boundaries between safety and threat, civilization and chaos. 12 o'clock and all's well. These words, or their local equivalent, rang through narrow streets and across market squares throughout medieval Europe, marking not just the passage of hours, but the continuing safety of the sleeping community. The night watch represented one of medieval society's most essential institutions, organized protection against the unique dangers that darkness brought. Medieval towns were particularly vulnerable after dark, explains urban historian Martha Carlin. Without adequate lighting, criminals could operate under cover of near-complete darkness. Fire, always a threat in wooden structures, could spread rapidly before being noticed. The night watch served as both protection and early warning system. The origins of the night watch dated back to Roman times, but the institution evolved significantly during the medieval period. By the 13th century, most substantial towns had established formalized systems of night patrol, with responsibilities divided between professional watchmen and ordinary citizens fulfilling rotational duties. In London, the Statute of Winchester, 1285, mandated that city gates be closed at night and that each ward provide men to guard the streets until morning. The watch served multiple functions beyond mere security. In an age before mechanical timepieces were widespread, the watchman's call provided temporal orientation, helping sleepers track the night's progression without needing to rise and check the stars. The regular cadence of 2 o'clock and all's well might briefly penetrate a sleeper's consciousness before allowing them to sink back into deeper slumber, reassured that both time and safety were being monitored. For medieval towns, the threat of fire loomed particularly large in nighttime fears. Wooden buildings clustered tightly together, illuminated by open flames, created conditions where a single unattended candle could reduce an entire neighborhood to ashes by morning. The watch kept vigilant eyes on chimney fires and unattended lights, their noses alert for the scent of smoke that might signal impending disaster. Beyond practical protection, the night watch embodied medieval conceptions of communal responsibility. The medieval town did not conceptualize security as something provided by a separate policing entity, notes legal historian James Maskell. Rather, security was understood as an obligation shared by all citizens, with the watch serving as the organized manifestation of this collective duty. This collective responsibility extended to the institution of curfew, from the old French couvre-feu, literally cover fire, which originated as a fire prevention measure requiring households to extinguish or cover their hearth fires at a designated hour. By the high medieval period, however, curfew had evolved into a complex social control mechanism, limiting movement after dark and clearly delineating between legitimate and suspicious nighttime activities. The curfew bell's solemn toll, often rung from the town's principal church, signaled the transition to a different legal and social reality. After curfew, the burden of proof shifted. Anyone found abroad needed legitimate reason for their presence on darkened streets. Travelers arriving after curfew might be required to stay outside city walls until morning, or seek special permission for entry through designated night gates. where their identities and purposes would be scrutinized. The medieval curfew created a binary temporal reality, explains cultural historian Craig Kozlowski. Day was the time of legitimate commerce and social interaction. Night was presumed to be the province of criminals, conspirators, and those with something to hide. Exceptions existed, of course. Midwives, physicians, and priests might be abroad at any hour, responding to emergencies that acknowledged no temporal boundaries. Certain industries, baking, brewing, metalworking, required night work and received special dispensations. But for most medieval people, the ringing of the curfew bell marked a clear boundary. The time for public life had ended, and the time for protected rest had begun. Enforcement of these nighttime restrictions fell to the watch, whose authority derived from both civic government and communal consent. Armed with bills, halberds, or simple staffs depending on local custom, watchmen possessed limited powers to detain suspicious persons until morning, when more formal authorities would make judgments about their nighttime activities. The watch provided not just practical security, but psychological comfort, notes anthropologist Elund Summers-Bremner. Medieval people understood their vulnerability during sleep profoundly. Knowing that wakeful eyes patrolled while they slumbered created a sense of communal protection that facilitated deeper rest. This psychological comfort extended to the auditory landscape of medieval nights. The watchman's call, predictable and reassuring, counterbalanced the unsettling sounds of darkness. The scurrying of rats, the distant howl of wolves, the ambiguous creaks and groans of wooden structures settling. The human voice, calling the hours and asserting that all's well, provided auditory evidence that civilization maintained its tenuous hold against the wild forces of night. For travelers caught on the road after dark, the absence of this organized protection highlighted their vulnerability. Without town walls and watchmen, those sleeping rough or in wayside inns relied more heavily on spiritual protection, personal weapons, and the uncertain mercy of strangers. The light of a town visible on the horizon, with its promise of organized watch and the rule of law, must have appeared as a beacon of safety in the medieval night. As you drift deeper into sleep tonight, surrounded by the electronic sentinels of security systems and the invisible networks of emergency response, perhaps you might spare a thought for those earlier guardians, the watchmen calling the hours through empty streets, their lanterns casting pools of amber light amid the vast medieval darkness, their presence a human affirmation that even in vulnerability we need not face the night alone. While watchmen patrolled the streets calling the hours, other guardians kept watch over sleeping souls, the silent sentinels of hearth and home that preserved both warmth and symbolic protection throughout the darkest hours. The hearth fire was more than warmth. It was a boundary between civilization and chaos, a living presence that required tending, and in return offered protection against the primordial darkness. As medieval night descended and household activities gradually ceased, the central fire remained, shifting from practical light source to spiritual guardian, its dancing flames creating a natural focal point for the last human interactions before sleep claimed the household. No single element was more central to medieval domestic life than fire, explains environmental historian Christopher Dyer. It provided the heat that made northern European winters survivable, the light that extended productive hours, and the transformative power that turned raw ingredients into nourishing food. But beyond these practical functions, fire served as the symbolic and literal heart of the home. The physical arrangement of medieval sleeping spaces often centered around this hearth. In humble single-room cottages, pallets might be arranged in radiating patterns around the central fire pit, with the most vulnerable members, the very young and very old, positioned closest to its protective warmth. In more substantial homes with multiple chambers, the distribution of heat became a reflection of social hierarchy, with servants sleeping in the kitchen near the main fire, while family members occupied chambers warmed by heat filtering through strategic openings or, in grander homes, by smaller braziers and chimney fires. As darkness fell and the evening meal concluded, the ritual of banking the fire for overnight began, a process requiring specific techniques to preserve embers until morning without risking unchecked flames. This nightly practice, performed with methodical care, represented one of medieval life's most essential skills. First, larger pieces of partially burned wood would be removed and set aside for morning rekindling. The remaining embers would be gathered into a compact mound at the center of the hearth, then carefully covered with a layer of ash, creating an insulating blanket that allowed the coals to smolder without consuming their fuel completely. Banking the fire properly was literally a matter of life and death, notes medieval domestic historian Raffaella Sarti. A household whose fire went out completely faced not just the inconvenience of cold rooms, but the significant labor of rekindling, using friction methods or, if available, expensive fire-starting tools. In some remote areas, a household might need to send someone miles away to borrow fire from neighbors, a humiliating admission of domestic failure. In wealthier households, this fire-tending responsibility often fell to specific servants. The evening banking of coals represented the culmination of day-long fire management, a continuous process of adjusting fuel and airflow to maintain appropriate temperatures for cooking, crafts, and comfort. The knowledge required was substantial. Different woods burned at different rates and temperatures. Certain combinations produced less smoke. Seasonal adjustments needed to account for changing humidity and ventilation patterns. Beyond practical concerns, the banked hearth fire carried profound symbolic weight. Medieval people often conceived of the soul as a divine spark housed temporarily within the human body, not unlike how the essential fire was preserved overnight beneath its blanket of protective ash. The banked hearth became a physical metaphor for the sleeping household. Though apparently dormant, vital energy remained preserved within, ready to rekindle with morning's attention. We see this metaphorical connection in medieval prayers said before banking the fire, explains religious historian Eamon Duffy. Many households would make the sign of the cross over the covered embers, seeing in this nightly preservation of fire a parallel to God's protection of the vulnerable soul during sleep. This spiritual dimension extended to folk practices surrounding the hearth. In many regions, a log or brand from the Christmas fire would be preserved throughout the year, then used to light the next year's Yule fire, creating continuity between seasons and symbolizing endurance through winter's darkest hours. Similar customs surrounded other significant dates, with fire serving as tangible connection between past and future, between the seen and unseen worlds. The sounds of a properly banked fire created a subtle nocturnal soundscape for medieval sleepers, the occasional settling of embers, the soft exhalation as trapped gases found release, the gentle popping of resinous wood. These sounds, unlike the startling cracks of an active fire, formed a soothing audio backdrop that signaled all was well with the household's most essential resource. For the medieval mind, however, fire's protection extended beyond the physical. Folklore throughout Europe attributed protective qualities to the hearth fire, believing it repelled malevolent spirits and wandering dead who might otherwise trouble sleeping inhabitants. In regions where belief in supernatural house guardians persisted beneath Christian overlay, small food offerings might be left near the banked embers, acknowledgement of the household spirits believed to protect the fire, and by extension, the vulnerable sleepers. The hearth in medieval cosmology occupied a liminal position, explains folklorist Claude Lecouteux. It represented a controlled opening between worlds, like the chimney above it, which could admit both beneficial warmth and dangerous intruders. Properly maintaining the fire ensured that this portal remained under human governance. This governance became particularly important during winter months, when darkness claimed more hours and cold posed greater threats. The emotional security provided by visible embers glowing beneath their ash covering cannot be overstated. Medieval people understood their vulnerability to winter's harshness with an immediacy we have largely forgotten. The banked fire represented not just tomorrow's convenience, but tonight's survival, tangible evidence that the household had secured enough resources to maintain this essential boundary between habitable space and hostile environment. In grander households, specialized architecture evolved to maximize fire's benefits while minimizing its dangers. The development of proper chimneys, replacing central hearths with smoke holes above, reduced indoor pollution but created new anxieties about maintaining circulation. Castle keeps and manor houses might employ dedicated fire watchers during winter nights, servants whose sole responsibility was monitoring banked fires and ensuring that neither excessive oxygen, risking unchecked flames, nor insufficient airflow, risking deadly carbon monoxide, disturbed the sleeping household. As you nest deeper into your blankets tonight, electronic thermostat, maintaining perfect temperature without conscious thought, perhaps you might imagine that earlier experience, the radiant warmth of a central hearth, the soft orange glow visible through ash covering, the comforting certainty that morning would bring renewal from these preserved embers, rather than the labor of creation from nothing. In this visualization, you touch something essential about medieval sleep: its conscious connection to elemental forces and its surrender to rhythms larger than individual desire. As the embers glowed like dying stars beneath their ashen blanket, the night sky above thatched roofs held its own stories and rhythms, celestial movements that medieval people integrated into their understanding of proper sleep. Your sleep was governed not just by sunset, but by the moon's gentle oversight, its waxing and waning phases establishing rhythms that medieval people observed with attentive respect. Unlike our modern relationship with celestial bodies, largely aesthetic and disconnected from daily function, medieval sleepers existed in conscious relationship with the night sky, their rest patterns influenced by lunar phases and seasonal star progressions that connected individual slumber to cosmic order. Medieval people possessed what we might call astronomical intimacy, explains historian Sarah Schechner. Without light pollution obscuring the view, and without artificial illumination extending day into night, the celestial canopy was both more visible and more relevant to daily life than most modern people can imagine. This relevance extended to practical considerations about sleep timing and quality. The full moon, flooding landscapes with silvery illumination that medieval people called moonshine, created periods when certain activities could extend beyond sunset. Agricultural communities might take advantage of harvest moons to continue crucial time-sensitive work, their sleep patterns temporarily shifting to accommodate these annual opportunities for productive night hours. Conversely, the new moon brought profound darkness, periods when venturing outside after sunset became particularly hazardous. These moonless nights encouraged earlier bedtimes and longer sleep durations, as households conserved expensive illumination resources like candles and oil. The monthly lunar cycle thus created natural variation in medieval sleep patterns: expansive wakefulness during the moon's fullness, contracted activity during its absence. We find evidence of this lunar influence in medieval terminology, notes linguist Andreas Musolf. Many European languages preserve the connection between lunacy and the moon's phases, a recognition that human behavior, including sleep quality, was believed to fluctuate with lunar cycles. Beyond the moon's direct influence, medieval people organized their understanding of time through seasonal star progressions. While complex astronomical knowledge remained primarily within educated circles, practical star wisdom pervaded rural communities. Specific constellations signaled appropriate bedtimes in different seasons, the appearance of Orion's belt in winter evenings, the summer positioning of Ursa Major. This celestial timekeeping created a connection between individual human rhythms and the larger cosmic order. The medieval conception of proper sleep involved alignment with natural cycles, explains medical historian Danielle Jacquot. Sleeping against these rhythms, staying awake when stars indicated sleep time, or sleeping during inappropriate astral configurations, was believed to create both physical and spiritual health consequences. For agricultural communities particularly, these celestial cycles merged with practical labor demands to create seasonal sleep variations that modern humans have largely abandoned. Summer patterns featured earlier rising and later bedtimes, maximizing productive daylight hours while reducing sleep duration to accommodate crucial growing season work. Winter brought the opposite pattern, extended darkness encouraging earlier bedtimes and later rising, with sleep durations expanding to 9 or even 10 hours during the deepest winter months. This seasonal variation wasn't merely practical, notes anthropologist Thomas Wynne. Medieval people understood it as proper alignment with divine order. The body's needs changed with the seasons, and proper sleep meant respecting these natural variations rather than imposing artificial consistency. Folk beliefs surrounding celestial influences on sleep quality permeated medieval culture. Certain star configurations were believed to encourage disturbing dreams or spiritual visitations. Others promoted healing rest or prophetic dreams. Mothers might delay putting children to bed if inauspicious stars were ascendant, waiting for more favorable celestial alignments. In some traditions, sleeping under the direct light of a full moon was avoided, believed to cause lunacy or sleep disturbances. The significance of celestial orientation extended to bed placement within medieval homes. Where architectural constraints allowed choice, beds might be positioned in alignment with cardinal directions, typically with the sleeper's head pointing north or east. These orientations connected individual rest with cosmic geography, placing the vulnerable sleeper within an ordered universe rather than arbitrary space. For medieval monasteries, where night observation formed part of the divine office, celestial markers helped determine proper times for the night prayer services that intentionally interrupted sleep. The position of specific stars or constellations served as celestial alarm clocks, prompting the monk responsible for waking the community to rise and summon his brothers to nocturnal prayers. This practice created a direct connection between divine worship and celestial movement, the monks literally responding to the language written in stars. Weather that obscured these celestial markers created practical challenges for medieval timekeeping. Cloudy nights that hid both moon and stars removed important temporal references, forcing communities to rely on less precise methods like hourglasses or water clocks to approximate appropriate sleep and wake times. These periods of celestial blindness were often accompanied by folk beliefs about disrupted natural order, a time when supernatural beings might more easily move undetected between worlds. Medieval people experienced a night sky that served both practical and symbolic functions, explains cultural astronomer Bernadette Brady. The predictable movement of celestial bodies created reliable temporal markers, while simultaneously manifesting divine order. Both aspects influenced sleep practices and beliefs. The connection between astrology and sleep recommendations permeated medieval medical advice. Physicians trained in European universities incorporated celestial considerations into their sleep prescriptions. recommending different sleep positions, durations, and preparations depending on a patient's astrological birth chart and current planetary alignments. These recommendations weren't considered superstitious but represented cutting-edge medical understanding about how human health related to cosmic influences. Medieval medicine operated from a fundamentally different conceptual framework than modern practice, notes historian Monica Green. The body was understood as a microcosm, reflecting the macrocosm of universal order. Sleep quality depended partly on proper alignment between these internal and external rhythms. For the medieval mind, this connection between personal sleep, cycles and celestial movements created comfort rather than anxiety. In a world filled with unpredictable dangers and limited human control, the reliable procession of stars and predictable lunar phases represented divine constancy, evidence that even in darkness, sacred order prevailed. As you rest tonight beneath a sky largely hidden by artificial illumination and ceiling barriers, perhaps you might imagine that earlier experience, the Milky Way spreading its luminous path across the black dome above, your resting place, the moon casting shifting shadows through simple windows, your sleep cycles expanding and contracting with seasonal light rather than remaining unnaturally consistent throughout the year. In this visualization, you touch something essential about medieval sleep: its conscious participation in rhythms that transcended individual human life, while simultaneously giving that life meaning and context. While the moon traced its path across the night sky, those unable to find rest sought remedies both practical and magical, drawing on traditions that balanced empirical wisdom with symbolic potency. While we've explored the common patterns of medieval sleep, individual experiences varied greatly across social stations and circumstances. Through surviving records, journals, letters, medical cases, and legal testimonies, we can glimpse the particular sleep worlds of medieval individuals, each navigating night's challenges according to their unique position and personality. Let us meet three such sleepers, their nighttime experiences illuminating different facets of medieval sleep culture. Our first subject comes to us through merchant records from late 14th century Florence. Giovanni di Benedetto, a cloth merchant, whose meticulous account books and personal journals provide unusually detailed insights into his sleep patterns while traveling the trade routes between Italian city-states and northern European markets. Born to the rhythm of market bells and raised on the promise of distant horizons, Giovanni's relationship with sleep was necessarily pragmatic. His journal entries reveal a man who viewed rest as both necessary resource and potential liability, time away from vigilant business management, yet essential for clear-headed negotiations. Stayed the night at the inn called the Golden Lion, reads one entry from 1376. Paid extra for a private chamber with door that locks securely. Placed my strongbox beneath the bed and slept with dagger under pillow. The mattress full of vermin, but I slept nonetheless, having travelled 16 miles since dawn. Giovanni's journals meticulously document the varying quality of sleeping accommodations throughout Europe, creating what amounts to a medieval traveller's guide to rest. He notes which monasteries offered clean pallets for merchant travellers, which inns changed their bedding regularly, which city gates remained accessible after curfew for late-arriving traders willing to pay special fees. His writings reveal sophisticated strategies for securing both person and goods during vulnerable sleep hours. In Lyon, he writes, arranged for the innkeeper's son to sit watch outside my door until midnight, then the stable boy until dawn, paying each a small coin and the promise of additional payment should my goods remain untouched. Slept with my purse bound to my wrist with leather cord. Giovanni's sleep remedies reflected his cosmopolitan experiences. His journals mention carrying a small sachet of dried herbs, lavender, chamomile, and hops, which he would steep in hot wine before bed when sleeping in unfamiliar surroundings. He notes particular difficulty sleeping before important transactions, developing a personal ritual of calculating simple sums in his head until mental fatigue overcame mercantile anxiety. Most poignantly, Giovanni's journals reveal how professional demands conflicted with medieval sleep ideals. "The bells called for first sleep," he writes from Bruges, "but I remained with account books until the night watchman called midnight. Now I will sleep straight through until dawn, missing the waking hour between sleeps that the priests say should be used for prayer and contemplation. God forgive this necessity of trade." Our second case study emerges from very different circumstances: the carefully documented life of Julian of Norwich, the 14th century English anchoress whose Revelations of Divine Love provides insights into sleep practices deliberately altered for spiritual purposes. She chose the small death of solitude long before she would face the greater passage, voluntarily sequestering herself in a small cell attached to the Church of St. Julian in Norwich. Unlike Giovanni's pragmatic approach to sleep, Julian's relationship with night and rest was intentionally manipulated as spiritual practice, her disrupted sleep patterns becoming pathways to divine communion. Historical records indicate that Julian's anchorhold, the small living space where she spent her enclosed life, contained a simple sleeping pallet, positioned so that through a small window she could glimpse the church altar. This spatial arrangement meant that the rhythms of church services structured her sleep, with night offices requiring her attention at hours when most laypeople would remain in first or second sleep. Julian's writings suggest that she practiced forms of sleep restriction as devotional discipline, deliberately reducing rest hours to create states of heightened spiritual receptivity. "In the deep watches of night," she writes, "when the body craves surrender but the soul remains wakeful, I have felt most clearly that love which surrounds all beings." Unlike traditional monastics who return to sleep after night offices, Julian appears to have often remained awake in contemplative prayer during hours that would typically constitute second sleep. This practice, consistent with recommendations from influential mystical texts circulating in late medieval England, used the natural liminal state between first and second sleep for spiritual advancement. Julian's most famous mystical experiences, the showings or visions described in her writings, often occurred during these intentionally cultivated liminal states between wakefulness and sleep. Medical historians have noted that the vivid visionary experiences she describes bear similarities to hypnagogic hallucinations, the dreamlike perceptions that occur in semi-conscious states between wakefulness and sleep. Julian's approach to sleep represents a conscious subversion of natural patterns for spiritual purposes, explains religious historian Barbara Newman. While ordinary medieval people sought alignment with natural sleep cycles, mystical traditions often encouraged strategic disruption of these cycles to access altered consciousness states. Julian's writings also reveal the emotional landscape of her disrupted sleep, the initial physical discomfort that gradually transformed into spiritual anticipation, the heightened sensory awareness that accompanied sleep deprivation, and the profound sense of divine presence she experienced during night vigils. Unlike Giovanni's practical approach, Julian's relationship with sleep was fundamentally transformative. Night hours became not just time for necessary restoration, but sacred space for encounter with the divine. Our third case study takes us to the royal bedchamber of King Henry VI of England, whose troubled sleep became entwined with the political destabilization of 15th century England. Through court chronicles, medical records, and diplomatic correspondence, we glimpse how sleep disturbances could extend beyond personal discomfort to influence historical events. Power affords luxury in all things except peace of mind. Despite possessing the most elaborate sleeping arrangements in his realm, a great bed raised on a dais, surrounded by rich hangings, layered with fine linens and furs, Henry's sleep was notoriously disturbed, particularly during periods of political tension. Contemporary accounts describe the king experiencing terrible nightmares, episodes of sleepwalking, and periods of complete insomnia that contributed to his mental instability. The elaborate rituals surrounding royal sleep reveal sleep's political dimensions in medieval governance. Court records detail the carefully choreographed evening ceremonies, the formal disrobing assisted by ranked nobles, the blessing of the royal bed by chaplains, the posting of armed knights within the bedchamber, and the systematic sealing of doors and windows against both physical and spiritual intruders. The king's bedchamber represented more than personal space, explains royal historian Chris Given Wilson. It was a political sphere where access to the sleeping monarch was carefully controlled, with proximity to the royal bed directly correlating to political influence. Henry's troubled sleep became intertwined with questions about his fitness to rule. Chronicle accounts describe how courtiers would listen anxiously outside the royal bedchamber, interpreting sounds of distress or periods of silence as omens regarding the kingdom's stability. When Henry experienced a complete mental breakdown in 1453, contemporaries noted that it began with several days of complete sleeplessness, followed by a state where he neither fully woke nor properly slept for extended periods. Medical treatments attempted for the king's sleep disturbances reflected the highest medieval sleep medicine. Court physicians prepared elaborate sleeping draughts, combining imported spices with native herbs, valerian, chamomile, and poppy syrup, mixed with exotic additions like ground pearl and powdered gold. The royal pillows were stuffed with dried hop flowers and lavender, replaced at regular intervals to maintain their soporific properties. Most fascinating are accounts describing how Henry's dreams influenced political decisions. Contemporary chronicles record instances where the king changed military strategies or diplomatic positions based on nightmares he interpreted as divine warnings. These dream-based decisions, sometimes contradicting careful counsel advice, created governance challenges as courtiers attempted to manage a monarch whose sleep experiences carried royal authority. Henry's case exemplifies medieval beliefs about the significance of royal dreams, notes political historian John Watts. While ordinary people's dreams might hold personal meaning, a king's dreams were understood as potentially prophetic for the entire realm, making his sleep disturbances a matter of national concern. These three sleepers, the pragmatic merchant, the mystical anchoress, and the troubled king, represent diverse relationships with medieval night. Giovanni approached sleep as a necessary but dangerous business requirement. Julian deliberately manipulated sleep for spiritual transformation. Henry's disturbed rest became entangled with questions of political stability and divine guidance. Through their individual experiences, we see how medieval sleep transcended mere physical necessity to become a complex field where practical concerns, spiritual beliefs, and political realities converged. Their stories remind us that while broad patterns can be discerned across medieval sleep culture, individual experiences remained as varied as the sleepers themselves. Each night a unique negotiation between personal circumstances and the broader rhythms of medieval darkness. And as the king's eyes finally closed in troubled slumber, we too find ourselves drifting back toward our own time, carrying with us these fragments of medieval night consciousness. And now you drift back to your bed, the medieval straw fading, beneath you to become your own familiar mattress, the distant church bells dissolving into the gentle hum of your bedroom's climate control system. You return with new awareness of both what we've lost and gained in our relationship with night's dark embrace. The journey through medieval sleep reveals paradoxes that might help contextualize your own relationship with slumber. Those earlier sleepers accepted darkness as inevitable presence rather than enemy to be vanquished. They synchronized with seasonal light patterns rather than imposing artificial consistency. They acknowledged sleep's vulnerability rather than assuming its security. In these acceptances, they found rhythms that modern sleep science increasingly suggests aligned better with human biology than many of our contemporary practices. Medieval sleep patterns weren't perfect by any means, notes sleep historian A. Roger E. Kirsch, but they developed over centuries in response to human circadian rhythms and seasonal light variations. Our abrupt departure from these patterns during industrialization created disconnections we're still struggling to reconcile. Perhaps most striking is the medieval comfort with sleep's segmentation. The artificial prolongation of daylight through electric illumination has compressed our sleep into a single consolidated block, quite different from the medieval pattern of first and second sleeps separated by a period of quiet wakefulness. Sleep researchers have found that when modern humans are placed in environments without artificial light, many naturally return to this biphasic pattern, suggesting it may better align with our inherent physiology. The wakeful period between sleeps represents perhaps our greatest lost sleep heritage. Medieval people utilized this middle night consciousness for activities ranging from practical household tasks to intimate conversations, contemplative prayer to creative thinking. This sanctioned wakefulness provided space for processing the day's events and connecting with household members in quiet intimacy, functions we now often sacrifice to our insistence on unbroken sleep. There's growing evidence that historical biphasic sleep offered psychological benefits, explains neuroscientist Matthew Walker. The midnight waking period created natural space for dream processing and emotional regulation that our consolidated sleep patterns have eliminated. Yet for all we might romanticize about medieval sleep patterns, we must acknowledge what we've gained as well. The physical security of modern sleep environments, locks, alarm systems, smoke detectors, has relieved us from the vigilance that medieval sleepers maintained even in unconsciousness. Our scientific understanding of sleep disorders has replaced supernatural fear with treatable medical conditions. Our climate-controlled bedrooms have freed us from seasonal sleep extremes that medieval bodies endured of necessity rather than choice. Most significantly, we've democratized sleep comfort in ways medieval people would find astonishing. The luxurious sleeping arrangements once reserved for nobility, mattresses free from infestation, bedding that provides consistent warmth, sleeping spaces protected from elements, have become standard expectations rather than extraordinary privileges. What once marked the height of aristocratic luxury, sleeping through the night undisturbed by external intrusions, has become a common expectation rather than rare privilege. As you rest tonight, perhaps you'll feel the echo of those ancient sleepers, dreaming beneath the same stars that now watch over you through layers of modern construction. Your struggles with insomnia, your midnight wakings, your early morning drowsiness, these experiences connect you to countless sleepers across centuries, each negotiating their own relationship with night's inevitable embrace. The medieval approach to sleep offers modern lessons worth considering. Their acceptance of seasonal variations suggests we might benefit from allowing our sleep patterns more flexibility throughout the year. Their comfort with wakefulness between sleeps reminds us that midnight consciousness needn't trigger anxiety. Their integration of spiritual practices with sleep transitions offers models for creating more meaningful boundaries between wakefulness and rest. The history of sleep isn't just academic curiosity, notes cultural anthropologist Veronica Strang. It's a repository of alternative relationships with night and rest, relationships developed over centuries of human experience that might help address our modern sleep crisis. That crisis, characterized by widespread insomnia, sleep medication dependence, and chronic sleep deprivation, suggests our modern approach has failed to fully replace what was lost when industrial schedules and electric lighting severed our connection to natural sleep rhythms. Perhaps by understanding medieval sleep, not as primitive precursor, but as alternative model, we might reclaim aspects that better serve our fundamental human needs. Sleep well, sleep deep. In the gentle knowledge that humans have always found their way to dreams, no matter the century. Your body carries ancient wisdom about how to surrender to darkness, how to cycle through sleep's necessary stages, how to return refreshed to daylight's demands. This biological inheritance connects you to those medieval sleepers whose straw mattresses and woolen blankets have long since returned to earth. As the boundaries between wakefulness and sleep grow soft around you, remember that you participate in humanity's oldest daily surrender, the necessary vulnerability that connects king and peasant, merchant and anchoress, medieval and modern in shared human experience. For all our technological advances and scientific understanding, we still cross sleep's threshold much as our ancestors did. Alone, trusting, and ultimately surrendering to mysteries our conscious minds cannot fully comprehend. Tonight, as your awareness begins to dissolve into sleep's embrace, perhaps you might whisper the same prayer that countless medieval lips murmured before surrendering to night's uncertainties. Into thy hands I commend my spirit, not as religious declaration, but as recognition of sleep's fundamental nature, a small, nightly surrender of control that connects us across centuries to every human who has ever closed their eyes, trusted in morning's eventual arrival, and allowed themselves to fall into dreams beneath the watchful stars. Sleep well, sleep deep, sleep in peace.